Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. You've probably heard about tourism in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. I've been there myself many times, and it's nothing like what you see in video games or horror movies. There are no ghosts, mutants, or radioactive anomalies, and death isn't lurking around every corner. Actually, I think it's one of the most peaceful and beautiful places on Earth, a testament to nature's resilience and how it can heal the wounds we've inflicted upon it. So when my friend Victor decided he wanted to visit, he knew exactly who to contact. Victor was studying nuclear physics at the university, and at the time he claimed he needed to conduct some research on radiation decay patterns. He said he wanted to take direct measurements and collect soil samples. We both knew this was just an excuse for an adventure, a chance to explore the abandoned power plant, the ghost city of Pripyat, and the mysterious exclusion zone that surrounded it all. The trip itself was fascinating, though I suppose I'd probably bore you with those details. That part isn't really important anyway. What matters is what happened when we were driving along one of the old forest roads, about 15 kilometers east of Pripyat. That's where we found it. An old, rusted fence stretched between the pine trees, blocking our path with a heavy chain and padlock securing the metal gate. A large warning sign displayed the familiar radiation hazard symbol, with text in both Russian and Ukrainian that read "Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only." But what really caught our attention was what lay beyond the fence. Set into what appeared to be an artificial hill, maybe 50 meters behind the gate, were two massive steel blast doors. They looked like something you'd expect to see protecting a bank vault, except these were easily 3 meters tall and just as wide. Painted across both doors in large, fading white numbers was 13. And below that, someone had spray painted "No Entry" in red letters. "What do you think it is?" Victor asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he studied the mysterious entrance. "I don't know," I replied, squinting through the chain-link fence. "Looks like some kind of bunker." I paused, taking a closer look at the massive doors, and it looks like it's been sealed for a very long time. Victor was already unpacking his radiation detector and soil sampling kit, but I could tell he was just as puzzled as I was. The Geiger counter clicked occasionally. Nothing unusual for this area, but there was something unsettling about the complete silence that surrounded the place. "Do you think we could get inside?" I asked, though even as the words left my mouth, I realized how foolish they sounded. "Not through those doors, that's for certain," Victor said, walking closer to examine the imposing steel barriers. "Even if they weren't welded shut, I doubt we'd have any way of opening them." He ran his hand along the seam where the two halves met. "Look at this. They've literally fused the edges together with some kind of industrial welding. Someone really didn't want people getting in there." "Or getting out," I muttered, though Victor didn't seem to hear me. We spent the next hour circling the perimeter, looking for another way in. The fence continued for several hundred meters in both directions before disappearing into the dense forest. As evening approached, and the shadows grew longer. I found myself wondering about the purpose of such extreme security measures. Why would anyone go to such lengths to seal a place so completely? Maxim, over here. Victor's voice jolted me from my thoughts. He was standing near a concrete structure, about 20 meters to the left of the main entrance. It was partially hidden by overgrown bushes and looked like some kind of ventilation system. A rectangular concrete block, roughly 2 meters square, with heavy steel grates covering what appeared to be air intake vents. "This has to be connected to whatever's down there," Victor said, examining the grates. "Look, these vents have been sealed too, but not as thoroughly as the main entrance." He was right. While the air vents were covered with steel plates, they looked like they could potentially be removed with the right tools. But what really caught our attention was a smaller door set into the side of the concrete structure. Unlike the massive blast doors at the main entrance, this one looked almost ordinary, except for the large wheel-shaped handle mounted on its face. "Service tunnel," I read aloud from the faded sign next to the door. "Should I try to open it?" Victor asked, his curiosity clearly overcoming his caution. "Yeah," I replied, surprising myself with my eagerness. "I mean, we don't have to go inside. At least we'll know if it still works." The wheel was stiff with rust and accumulated grime, but after several minutes of effort, Victor managed to get it turning. There was a heavy metallic clunk as the locking mechanism disengaged, and the door slowly swung inward. Behind it lay a small metal platform and the beginning of a vertical shaft that disappeared into darkness below. A steel ladder was mounted to one wall, vanishing into the black depths. What struck me immediately was that there was an identical wheel mechanism on the inside of the door, meaning it could be locked from either side. But why would anyone need to lock themselves in? I pulled out my phone and activated its flashlight, directing the beam down into the shaft. The light wasn't powerful enough to reach the bottom, but I could see that the ladder continued down for quite a distance. The air rising from below was stale and damp, carrying a faint chemical odor that I couldn't identify. "This is incredible," Victor whispered, his voice filled with excitement. "We have to come back and explore this properly." I had to agree. It was getting dark, and we weren't prepared for any kind of underground expedition. We carefully closed and locked the service door, but both of us knew we'd be returning. Back home that evening, I immediately began researching what we'd found. Unfortunately, my searches turned up nothing useful. I even called a Chernobyl. He was the one who'd introduced me to the zone in the first place, a former stalker who'd been guiding tourists and researchers for years. But even he couldn't help. "Never heard of any Object 13, he told me over the phone. "But I'll ask around. Some of the old-timers might know something." I told him about our plan to return and explore the underground facility, and asked if he wanted to join us. Unfortunately, he was planning to be out of the country for several weeks on business. A week later, Victor and I returned with proper equipment. We brought climbing rope, powerful LED flashlights, emergency glow sticks, waterproof protective clothing, an oxygen meter, and even a small emergency breathing apparatus, just in case. We weren't stupid. We made sure to tell several friends and family members about our expedition and when we expected to return. We sealed the service door behind us as we descended, not wanting to risk causing some kind of contamination leak if there were hazardous materials below. The shaft was deeper than we'd initially thought, probably close to 20 meters, before it opened into a concrete tunnel that housed the facility's air circulation system and various utility pipes. There was obviously no electrical power, so we relied entirely on our flashlights as we made our way through the tunnels. Eventually, we reached another door, this one a standard industrial entrance, rather than the heavy blast door we'd seen from outside. Beyond this door, we found a large mechanical room housing 4 massive air circulation pumps and associated electrical control equipment. The ventilation system split here into multiple branches, 2 large ducts that continued straight down into the earth, and 2 smaller ones that ran horizontally across the room to another set of doors. Through these doors lay an enormous storage hall filled with wooden crates, metal containers, and various equipment scattered across the floor. There was also a security checkpoint, and behind that, we could see the massive blast doors we'd observed from outside the fence. Heavy lifting equipment sat nearby, as if someone had been in the middle of moving supplies when operations suddenly ceased. We returned to the checkpoint and discovered a set of elevators alongside a facility map mounted on the wall. According to the diagram, we were currently on floor 0, the main entry level. Below us were 4 additional levels. Floor 1 housed offices, security, and recreation facilities. Floor 2 contained secure laboratories. Floor 3 held an accelerator, clean rooms, and decontamination chambers. And floor 4 was simply labeled experimental site. The map was titled Object 13. This wasn't a military bunker at all. It was a research facility. Since the elevators were non-functional without power, we took the stairwell. As we descended, an unsettling thought occurred to me. If people had been moving supplies and equipment toward the main exit, were they trying to evacuate? And if so, what had they been running from? I was still pondering this when my foot struck something on one of the steps. Small metallic objects scattered across the stairs with a distinctive ringing sound. I bent down to examine them and felt my blood run cold. Bullet casings, dozens of them. But this wasn't the only thing that made me uneasy about the place. As soon as we reached level 1, I noticed that every single door stood wide open. Every one. The first level consisted of a long rectangular corridor with various rooms branching off from it. There was a cafeteria and kitchen right at the beginning, followed by numerous offices lining both sides of the hallway. Everything appeared exactly as it had been left, paperwork scattered on desks. Old computer terminals sitting silent, personal belongings abandoned in place. Had everyone left in a hurry? Maxim, Victor called from the cafeteria across the corridor. When I joined him, I was speechless. The dining area still contained tables set for meals, with food still sitting on plates. But this wasn't ordinary abandoned food. After 30 years, it should have been nothing but dust and decay. Instead, while it certainly wasn't fresh, it wasn't decomposing as it should have been either. "How is this possible?" I asked. "I don't know," Victor replied, just as confused as I was. Maybe it was irradiated somehow, but my detector isn't showing anything unusual. I really don't know. Looking back now as I record this, there were so many warning signs. Something terrible had happened in this place, but I suppose we were too excited and curious to pay proper attention. It was at this point that my excitement began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Nevertheless, we continued our descent to level 2. The stairway ended here, and to continue deeper, we'd have to cross the entire floor to reach another staircase on the opposite side. There was another security checkpoint and blast door that we had to pass through to reach the laboratory areas. Again, every door stood open. But unlike the orderly abandonment of level 1, this floor was in complete chaos. Equipment was overturned, papers scattered everywhere, and furniture knocked about as if there had been some kind of struggle. The rooms contained all sorts of scientific equipment that I couldn't begin to understand, and there were more bullet casings scattered across the floor. The layout was similar to the level above one central rectangular corridor, with rooms branching off like a maze. Near the far end, we found what appeared to be the head scientist's office. Like everywhere else, it was in complete disarray, but I managed to find a logbook among the scattered papers on the desk. Most of the pages had been torn out, but several entries remained. October 5th, 1984. Today we successfully managed to translocate several atoms without any changes in their physical properties. It's going to be a long road until we can transport solid objects, but we're making excellent progress. January 17th, 1985. We've managed to transport an apple today. However, I couldn't help but notice that the pattern of red and green skin on top was slightly different than before the translocation. It was still the same apple with the same structure and weight, and when we tested some electronics, they were unharmed and in working order. I think we still have much to learn about this technology, but we cannot slow down now. The country is depending on us. February 21st, 1985. After successful animal trials, we translocated our first human test subject today. He's alive and healthy, a brave hero of our nation. We have proven that this technology works, but the practicality is still very limited due to the fixed translocation ratio. We can only exchange the positions of two objects with equal mass. I have proposed a new type of device that could possibly achieve one-way translocation of a single object, but it would require an enormous amount of energy. May 1st, 1985. Our superiors have accepted my proposal. They're going to build a much larger translocator here at the power plant, so we can use the nuclear reactor as a direct power source. There is one more thing. We've now translocated dozens of test subjects. Each one is alive and well, but sometimes they seem different. They sometimes claim that various events in the past happened differently than they actually did. Sometimes they claim to know people who don't exist, or more alarmingly, they know people they're not supposed to know. Below this, someone had added a note in pencil. Test subject 28 began speaking in an unknown language and couldn't understand any real language after the experiment. There were many missing pages after this entry. And then, April 25th, 1986. We're going to try a completely different approach. It's been more than a year, and we're still unsuccessful in eliminating the translocation symmetry anomaly. We still don't even know what's causing it, but we're not going to make progress this way. Today we're going to attempt to access what we're calling the conduit reality. Even though Unit 2, the one we built into the power plant, is still new, we're going to use it for this experiment. Who knows what wonders are waiting for us on the other side? The final page contained a single phrase written over and over again. We let them in. I closed the logbook and stepped back into the hallway. There were torn pieces of clothing scattered everywhere, shredded fabric, the occasional shoe or watch, but no bodies and no blood. Just remnants of what people had been wearing. I looked down the dark corridor stretching ahead of us and just stood there. A wave of pure, instinctive dread washed over me. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. I just stood there, paralyzed. "We're leaving," Victor said quietly. Now we turned and began walking away, slowly at first, then picking up our pace. Our footsteps echoed through the underground facility. I just wanted to get out of there. We shouldn't have come down here. We shouldn't have done this, Victor muttered. I didn't tell him about what I'd read in the logbook, but my thoughts were interrupted by a sudden realization. Victor's voice hadn't echoed, only our footsteps. I think he noticed it too, because we both stopped and listened. Nothing, just silence. I took a step forward, then another. There was a door just ahead of us, and I decided to test something. I closed it as we passed, placing a glass beaker I'd found on the floor on top of the door handle as a simple alarm. We walked away carefully at first, but then quickened our pace once again. We turned a corner, and then it happened. The sound of shattering glass echoed behind us. Someone or something had opened the door. We dropped everything except our flashlights and ran. I didn't know I could run that fast. I'd always tried to act tough, but I'd never been so terrified in my life. Our footsteps no longer echoed in sync. There were more footsteps than just ours. Something was chasing us. As soon as we reached the security checkpoint, we began closing the blast door. The sounds were getting closer. The rusty hinges squealed in protest, but we pulled with all our strength. We almost had it closed when we heard something that made my blood freeze. A loud, guttural, completely inhuman roar. The door slammed shut, and I spun the wheel to lock it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But then I realized it wasn't just my heartbeat I was hearing. Something was pounding on the locked blast door from the other side. We ran again, taking the stairs 2 and 3 steps at a time. We finally reached the air pump room, completely exhausted. Despite my terror, I felt like I might collapse if I took another step. At least we'd locked whatever it was down there. Victor sat down and leaned against one of the large vertical air ducts with a loud bang. But then there was another bang and another. That's when I realized our mistake. We'd locked it behind the blast door, but we'd forgotten about the ventilation system. Victor and I looked at each other, our eyes meeting in horror. Then came the sound of tearing metal from somewhere above us. I heard Victor scream as something grabbed him and dragged him back down into the ventilation shaft. I feel terrible admitting this, but I just ran. I climbed the service ladder as fast as I could and locked the service door behind me. As soon as I was outside and had cell phone reception again, my phone started beeping with a flood of missed calls and messages. Most were from a Chernobyl. "Hey Maxim, I found someone who knows about Object 13. Please call me as soon as you can. He says it's dangerous and you should stay away. This guy seems really serious. Please call me back immediately. I don't know what's going on, but he's driving there right now. I hope you get this before you go down there. Stay safe, my friend. There was also a message from an unknown number. Maxim, this is Professor Kovalenko. I know what you found, and I'm driving from Kiev right now. Do not go down there. If you already did and managed to get out, lock that door you used and make sure it stays locked. I'll try to call you when I arrive. So here I am, recording this while I wait. I'm doing this to make sure no one else repeats our mistake, since I don't know if I'll live long enough to tell anyone in person. I just can't leave Victor behind. I have to go back for him. College students, the professor said, shaking his head as he examined the locked service door. What does the sign on the fence say? Authorized personnel only. What does this say? He pointed at the spray-painted text on the main blast doors. No entry. Do you think we put these warnings up because we had nothing better to do? Do you really have nothing else to do but poke around in places that are none of your business? And now look what's happened. Look what you've done. Professor Kovalenko had yelled at me after I finished explaining what had happened. The first thing he did when he arrived was check the service tunnel to make sure it was properly sealed. He didn't even speak to me until we'd verified that it was locked tight. He was an average-looking man, probably in his mid-50s, though I think most people would say he looked older than his actual age. There was a weariness about him that seemed to go beyond simple physical fatigue. "What is this place?" I asked. "You have no idea," he replied, then stood up and walked toward his car. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to save your friend, and you're coming with me. You'll do exactly as I say, and nothing else. Stay quiet, don't exhaust yourself. The air isn't circulating down there, and you'll burn through the oxygen and suffocate. You'll remain tethered to me by this line." He held up what looked like a small, retractable winch. "When I turn off my light, you'll do the same immediately, and you won't move until I tell you to." He continued pulling equipment from his car's trunk, including a shotgun. "Are those going to help?" I asked, nodding toward the weapons. "To some extent, but don't use yours unless I tell you to," he said, handing me a pistol. "One last thing, do you know what ozone smells like?" I nodded. "Good. If you smell ozone, run." I was beginning to wonder if this was such a good idea when he secured the service door from the inside with a massive padlock and heavy chain. "This is the only way we can keep them from getting out," he explained when he noticed me watching. Of course, this was a terrible idea, possibly the worst I'd ever had. Let me rephrase that. I was starting to wonder if I'd ever see that padlock opened again. "Don't I get a key?" I asked, watching him close it with a loud click. "Sorry, I only have one. But don't worry, I'm right here," he said, patting the tether line that connected us. The retractable cable extended and retracted between us as we moved through the facility, creating a strange rhythm with the sound of diesel fuel sloshing in the large containers we carried. Our first stop was the generator room on the other side of the main storage hall. The generator rattled and hummed as it slowly came to life. "Did you see it?" Professor Kovalenko asked while we waited for the machine to fully start up. "See what? We'll have some time to talk while this warms up. Did you get a look at what took your friend?" "No," I answered. "What is this place?" He stared off into the distance and sighed before explaining. It was originally a military supply depot in the 1950s. In the late 70s, It was converted into a research site for projects that were too sensitive for the public to know about. And believe me, some of that research was seriously disturbing. Then they started this translocation project and even rebuilt half the facility to accommodate it. That's when everything went to hell. How do you know all this? I used to work here, he said simply. So what are those things down there? He started to answer, then seemed to change his mind. I don't know. I was just an assistant back then. Is there anyone who does know? Not anymore. Everyone who really knew. Well, let's just say they never left this place. The engine engaged with a mechanical click, and the generator finally came fully online. How did you get out? I didn't. He paused, looking at me with tired eyes. I called in sick the day it happened. The lights flickered on briefly, then shut off again as a circuit breaker activated. That's fine. We can't spare the power for lighting anyway. We'll need it somewhere else, the professor said. Whatever happened here, whatever killed all those people down there, it was all connected to the Chernobyl disaster. He shook his head. He wasn't here. He called in sick. He took a damn sick day. Come on, let's go. We returned to the laboratory security checkpoint that Victor and I had sealed during our escape. Professor Kovalenko told me to stay as quiet as possible as we slowly opened the blast door. To our surprise, bright light immediately blinded us. Someone was shining a flashlight directly at us from the other side. I stepped back while my eyes adjusted, and then I saw the source, Victor's flashlight, still lying on the floor where we dropped it. I moved to pick it up, but the professor quickly stopped me with his arm and pointed into the darkness of the corridor ahead. We stood there silently for several moments, and I thought I heard something moving in the distance. Professor Kovalenko immediately turned off his headlamp and gestured for me to do the same. He crouched in a corner and I followed, turning off my light as well. But we were still illuminated by Victor's abandoned flashlight. The professor quietly cursed under his breath, then quickly went to retrieve the flashlight. Then we were in complete darkness. People say that when you're under stress and lose one of your senses, the others become heightened to compensate. It's true. Or maybe whatever was down there was just getting closer. It doesn't matter. I heard something drop to the ground with a muffled, wet splat. Then came a few irregular footsteps, not like someone walking in shoes, but like someone walking barefoot on wet concrete. The sounds were getting closer. I instinctively grabbed the gun Professor Kovalenko had given me, hoping I wouldn't need to use it. The thing was so close now that I could hear slow, raspy breathing. I think I even felt a cold breath on my face as it inhaled and exhaled. Then something crashed into a wall in the direction we'd come from, accompanied by the sound of breaking glass and plastic. Whatever had been near us turned and quickly moved toward the noise. I thought it was gone and we were safe, but then a hand suddenly brushed against me. I almost jumped and screamed, but the hand quickly moved to cover my mouth, preventing me from making any sound. Another hand took my gun. "It's me. Follow me slowly," a voice whispered in my ear. We entered a room off to the side, and I heard the door close silently behind us. We waited for several minutes before turning our lights back on. "Don't ever do that again," I whispered. But Professor Kovalenko wasn't listening. He was staring at droplets of thick, black fluid on the floor. "What is that?" I asked. "Blood, or at least it used to be," he answered, following the trail. We traced the dark liquid across several rooms until we reached a large chemical laboratory. There was something lying on the ground in a puddle of the black substance, Victor's knife. There was also some red liquid nearby, and I could tell without doubt that it was fresh blood. A trail of red droplets led in the opposite direction from the black liquid. "Look, he must have gotten away," I whispered, pointing toward the blood trail. "I doubt it. If we want to find him, we'll have to go to level 4, the professor replied. He glanced at the knife and then acted as if he hadn't seen anything. "But look, this is his knife. They must have fought here, and then he went that way." I pointed in the direction the blood trail led. "He must be injured. That's one more reason not to waste time." "Let's go," he said, stepping back toward the central corridor. I wanted to stay and search for Victor, but the tether connecting us wouldn't allow me to stray far, so I had to follow. "Professor, please tell me what's going on." "How do you know he's not up there?" "Because I know." "Now come on, we don't have time to argue." We weren't whispering anymore. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me why you're so certain," I insisted. "Because he's dead," the professor said bluntly. "Now come on, let's go. This isn't a place where we want to linger. We have to get down to level 4. "No," I said firmly. I'd trusted him at first because he was the only one who could help Victor and me. That had been my sole focus, saving Victor. But now I was beginning to understand what I'd got myself into and how foolish I'd been. He wasn't just an assistant as he'd claimed, and we weren't here to save Victor. I started unbuckling my end of the tether. "What are you doing?" he asked, raising his voice. "I'm leaving." "Give me the key to the padlock," I demanded. "No, I can't do that," he said, agitation clear in his voice. I had no choice. I raised my gun toward him. "Give me the key," I demanded again. "You really think I'd give you a working weapon?" he replied, pointing his shotgun at me. I pulled the trigger. Nothing. The gun was empty. "Why are we here? Why didn't you call your colleagues, your superiors, whoever, to handle this? Why do you have to hold me at gunpoint?" "Let's just say my former colleagues and I don't share the same goals anymore. But make no mistake, they are coming. Not with guns, but with concrete. They're going to seal this place permanently, and we need to be quick if we want to get out before that happens." "Why can't you just let me leave now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because this is a 2-person job," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "There are things much more important than you, me, or your friend." I couldn't deny that maybe he was right, but I couldn't handle this situation, and I didn't understand any of it. "Who are you?" I asked, meeting his gaze. But then I looked away. Something had caught my attention movement behind him. "Professor," it was one of the creatures, crawling across the ceiling toward us. Its body vaguely resembled a human form, but its skin was pale and stretched tight over thin bones. Dark veins were visible through the translucent skin, filled with the same black fluid we'd found earlier. It had no hair, and there were only dark holes where its nose and ears should have been. Its eyes were bloodshot and locked in a blank, unblinking stare. We'd escaped from it before, but our argument had drawn it back. It was too late to run now. Professor Kovalenko noticed my stare and began to turn, but he wasn't fast enough. The creature lunged at him just as he spun around. He managed to fire one shot, but missed, and the thing knocked him to the ground. The gunshot was deafening in such a confined space. My ears were ringing, and my vision was partially blinded by the muzzle flash. In the confusion, I turned to run, but I'd forgotten that I was still tethered to the professor. After the line reached its full extension, it snapped taut, stopping me abruptly and sending me tumbling to the ground. I looked back and saw that the creature was now staring at me. The professor was lying motionless on the floor. The force of my fall must have pulled the thing off him, and now it was deciding whether to finish him off or come after me. I finally managed to disconnect the tether and threw the useless pistol at the creature. It struck its head, and the thing briefly stumbled, giving me time to run to the only place I could think of, a storage room adjacent to the large chemistry lab. I barricaded the door with a heavy shelf. The creature spent several minutes trying to break in, but eventually gave up and left, presumably to finish off Professor Kovalenko. I stayed in that room, huddled in a corner, too terrified to do anything. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Eventually, it became difficult to breathe, and for a while, I thought I might just stay there and end it all peacefully, rather than face the violent death that was likely waiting for me outside. But then I heard a voice calling my name. Victor's voice. "Victor, is that you?" I called back. "Oh, thank God. I thought I was going to die down here." "You came back," he answered. I went to open the door, but then hesitated. "How did you find me?" I was hiding too, and then I heard the gunshot. "I came to investigate." "Maxim, please come out. We need to get out of here." I sat back down. Maybe it really was him, but what if it wasn't? I didn't want to find out. "No," I said. "You're supposed to be dead. I saw blood. It can't be you." "What?" "I don't." "What are you talking about, Maxim?" "One of those things attacked me pretty badly, but I'm alive. Please just come out and let's get out of here," he pleaded. I had decided I wouldn't open the door, but then I changed my mind when he said something that only the real Victor could know. "Maxim, remember the old oak tree? I knew you'd come back for me. When we were children, Victor and I used to play near this enormous oak tree behind his grandmother's house. We'd climb it for hours, but one day I had the brilliant idea of making a bet. Whoever could climb the highest would win. I almost reached the top, but then realized what a terrible idea it was. The branches beneath me were too thin and could break at any moment. But Victor didn't want to lose. He tried to climb even higher than me, and then the branch he was standing on snapped. He fell, but fortunately landed in a pile of fallen leaves and only broke his leg. He could have been killed if he'd hit solid ground. It was my fault. I'd almost gotten him killed because of a stupid bet. He chose not to tell anyone how it really happened because we were both afraid of getting in trouble. But I'd felt guilty about it ever since. There was no way anyone else could have known about that oak tree if it wasn't really Victor. I opened the door, and there he was. He looked terrible. Bruises and cuts covered his body, and he had a torn, blood-stained piece of shirt wrapped around his left hand. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I've been better. Let's just get out of here." "That's not going to be easy," I said, and I explained everything that had happened since we'd been separated. How Professor Kovalenko had locked us in, how he was either dead or gone, and how we were trapped down here. "There are tools and supplies over there," Victor said, pointing toward the equipment we'd seen earlier. "Maybe we can find something to cut through the chain." We decided to try. It was better than searching for the professor's key. We found the shotgun, stained with blood, both human and something else, and immediately felt safer. We also recovered our backpacks that we dropped during our initial escape. Fortunately, all our gear was still there. We carefully made our way back to the main storage hall, though I had the distinct feeling we were being watched the entire time. Near the main entrance, we found some old saws and files. We gathered what we could, but we weren't alone. The inhabitants had finally decided to make their move. One of the pale creatures crawled out of the stairwell. I aimed and fired, and it fell from the ceiling, twitching like a dying insect. But it didn't matter, because it wasn't alone. Another one appeared, then another and another. We ran to the air pump room and barricaded the door by jamming a large saw between the handles. We had to work quickly, because we knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through, or found another way in through the ventilation system. Victor couldn't operate the shotgun properly with his injured hand, so he worked on cutting the chain while I stood guard, ready to shoot anything that emerged from the vents. It was working, but far too slowly. Victor had barely managed to cut through a few millimeters when I could hear the door beginning to buckle. The creatures were pounding against it relentlessly, and I could see the hinges starting to rattle. I was certain they'd break through at any moment. Then suddenly they stopped. I coughed as a sharp, acrid odor hit my nostrils. "What is that smell?" Victor asked, looking up from his work. "Oh no, no, no," I said anxiously. I immediately recognized the odor. It was similar to what we'd noticed when we first entered the facility, but much, much stronger. My Geiger counter started clicking rapidly. "What's happening?" Victor asked. Professor Kovalenko had warned me about this. He told me to run if I smelled ozone. Just as I finished this thought, the door shook with an enormous impact that sent dust flying through the air and left the steel bent outward. There was nowhere to run. We had a damaged blast door on one side, and who knows what on the other. I had no idea how we could possibly survive, but fortunately Victor did. "Do you still have the rope?" he asked. Without hesitation, I tied it around one of the large air pumps. It wasn't easy working with the rope, while my hands shook violently. But then another thunderous impact echoed through the room. One of the bolts holding the door in place was torn loose and launched across the room. I felt a wave of cold terror run down my spine, and suddenly I had only one purpose: to secure that knot. Everything else in my mind just shut down. I finished the task, and we dropped the other end down through the broken ventilation shaft that Victor had been dragged into earlier. We climbed inside and began sliding down the rope. Then I heard another massive impact, followed by what sounded like the door hitting the ground. Whatever it was had broken through. I slid down faster, but the rope was starting to burn my hands. I lost my grip and fell the last few meters, landing hard on top of another ventilation grate. It broke under my weight, and I fell through into yet another corridor below. Victor landed on top of me. It took us several minutes to get back on our feet. I looked around and saw an orange-tiled door marked decontamination. We were on level 3. There was no handle on the door, only a button mounted on the wall beside it. I pressed it, and after a few seconds, the door opened. We entered a small chamber with a control panel. Using the controls, I sealed the door behind us. Several jets then blasted us with pressurized air. A green light activated, and then another door in front of us opened, inviting us deeper into the facility. I noticed that the control panel was stained with fresh blood. Was Professor Kovalenko still alive? Had he passed through here? We had no choice but to continue forward. We couldn't go back, so our only option was to see how deep this rabbit hole went. This was supposed to be a clean room, but the area was even more destroyed than the upper levels. After walking and searching for some time, we discovered a room that appeared to be a makeshift medical facility. There were several dozen beds, separated by plastic curtains, along with various medical equipment. Some of the beds still had information clipboards attached. Patient 2, Quarantine Survey Team C, patient in coma. Observation only. Do not interfere, deceased 7:28 hours, unknown cause. Patient 6, Quarantine Survey Team C, patient in coma. Observation only. Do not interfere, deceased 7:52 hours, unknown cause. Patient 19, Quarantine on-site operative assistant, first contact with Survey Team C. Massive blunt force trauma to chest. Suspected internal damage, cranial concussion. Suspected damage to cervical spine, dislocated left shoulder, fracture of left humerus, multiple lacerations to chest, deceased 404 hours, internal hemorrhage. Patient 7, Quarantine Survey Team C, patient is unresponsive, mild to moderate frostbite. Observation only. Do not interfere, termination order signed. Kovalenko. There were empty body bags on the other side of the room. We searched the area thoroughly and eventually made our way to the lowest accessible levels of the facility. There was a horrible, rotting smell everywhere. When we entered one particular room, I nearly vomited. There was some kind of organic substance covering everything. The walls, floor, ceiling, everywhere. It looked like flesh with tendrils or veins running across it, like something from a horror video game. And there were bodies attached to it, dozens of them, shriveled up like dead insects caught in a spider's web. I think we should go back, Victor said nervously. We turned around to leave, but then I heard debris shifting in the distance, coming from the corridor we'd entered through. Soon enough, one of those creatures crawled into the light cast by my flashlight. It stood there for a moment, staring at us with its blank eyes. Then it lunged forward, but suddenly collapsed to the ground, dead. An empty shotgun shell clattered beside it. Move, Professor Kovalenko's voice shouted from somewhere in the darkness. I could hear more of the creatures making their way toward us in the distance. So we ran deeper into the facility. The professor shot several more as we fled, but then we heard the distinctive click of an empty weapon. We eventually found ourselves in a long, dark tunnel that was flooded with knee-deep water. The creatures were almost upon us, and I could see them crawling along the walls behind us as we entered the tunnel. But then I noticed something strange. They weren't following us into the water. They seemed to stop at the entrance, unwilling or unable to enter the flooded passage. We waded through the ice-cold water for what felt like hours. Fortunately, it was only about knee-deep, so while it was miserable, it wasn't life-threatening. Victor hadn't looked well since I'd found him, but as we walked through the tunnel, he seemed to be getting progressively worse. He complained of headaches and dizziness. His skin became increasingly pale, and he looked very weak. After some time, I had to support him as we walked. Eventually, he collapsed completely and fell unconscious. He couldn't go back, so my only option was to drag him through the water. This continued for quite some time, and then I heard something far behind us, a splash. I turned and shined my light back into the dark tunnel. Nothing visible. "Hello," I called, hoping for an answer. Maybe Professor Kovalenko had followed us. Silence. I quickened my pace, though it wasn't easy dragging another person through knee-deep water. The sounds continued. They weren't getting closer or farther away. They were just there, constant and unsettling. Then I reached the end of the tunnel. It was sealed off by another massive steel door, with no visible way to open it. A dead end. I stopped and listened carefully. The sounds weren't just random splashing. It was more like someone wading through the water behind us. I panicked and started banging on the door, calling for help. I had nowhere to go. The sounds were getting closer now. I could see ripples in the water moving toward us. I slowly turned to look back down the tunnel. I saw nothing, heard nothing, just silence and darkness. And then I smelled it, that familiar scent that made my blood run cold. Ozone. Behind me, I heard metal shifting, and the door opened. "Maxim," Professor Kovalenko's familiar voice called out. He pulled Victor and me through the door and sealed it as quickly as possible. "Your friend, what happened to him?" he asked, examining the still unconscious Victor. I explained what I knew and asked if he was all right. He had a large gash across his face, and his right eye was swollen shut. "I'm fine, no thanks to you," he replied tersely. He noticed the makeshift bandages on Victor's arm and unwrapped them. What I had thought was just a regular wound was actually a bite mark, deep puncture wounds that looked disturbingly infected. "Stand back," Professor Kovalenko said, drawing his pistol. "Wait. At least tell me what's going on. He's going to be dead in a few minutes, and this will make it easier for him. But mostly for us. Please, isn't there anything else we can do?" I pleaded. He looked at me, then at Victor, and stood there thinking for a moment. I was immediately relieved when he holstered his weapon. "This might help him," he said, pulling out a case containing a syringe from his backpack. It appeared to have been used recently and was only about half full of clear liquid. He injected Victor with the remaining contents. "It won't matter anyway," he muttered. "What do you mean?" "And help me carry him. I'm not carrying him. You figure it out." As we moved through the facility, Professor Kovalenko began explaining the truth behind everything that had happened. "You've probably already figured out that all this was connected to the disaster 30 years ago. The first machine we used for translocation experiments wasn't powerful or reliable enough. We discovered that the whole process wasn't as simple as it seemed. We weren't just teleporting objects to different places. We were transferring them between multiple parallel realities. But it was limited. We could only exchange 2 objects of equal mass between identical locations in different realities. So they built a new, much larger machine here and used the nuclear reactor to power it. We hoped we could move anything to any location between any 2 realities. We started exploring completely new universes. We saw worlds where Germany won World War II worlds where humanity had destroyed itself, even worlds where life had never evolved on Earth. But then someone had an idea. If there were all these parallel universes, what existed between them? There was only one way to find out, and that's when everything went wrong. We should have been satisfied with what we had. But we always want more, don't we? We tried to access what we called the conduit reality. But when we activated the machine, something went wrong. A portal was created that operated independently of our equipment. It was sustaining itself. We sent a survey team through. They came back after a few minutes reporting strange phenomena, how space and time felt distorted in that place, how some of them claimed to have seen themselves in different locations simultaneously. They refused to go back, even when threatened with severe penalties. So we sent a second team to continue the exploration. This team didn't return at all. We sent a third team to find the second one. They did come back, but something was wrong with them. Their minds seemed erased. I pictured the blank stares of the creatures we'd encountered. Shortly after they returned, a massive burst of energy flowed out from the portal directly into the reactor. But that wasn't all. And you know all this because you took a sick day, I asked. I was working in a different part of the facility when it happened. I'll never forget when someone came running to tell me that something had come through the portal into our world. What was it? I don't know. Nobody knows. It was unlike anything we'd ever encountered, and it killed almost everyone here. And it didn't just kill them, it did things to people. You've seen what's left of them. We entered a control room filled with computers and various monitoring equipment. Professor Kovalenko sealed another blast door behind us. We need to close the portal. We've tried before, but those things wouldn't let us get close enough. Where are they now? As soon as I heard that you'd entered the facility and come back out, I knew something had changed. This place used to be swarming with them. A few years ago, anyone who went inside wouldn't make it past level 1 alive. But we made it this far. I don't know why, and that's what frightens me. Something isn't right. I know I'm asking a lot, but we need to go through the portal and use this. He emptied his backpack and produced a crude-looking device covered in wires, coils, and various electronic components. We need to place one end in the other reality and return with the second end to ours. If it works, it should cause the portal to collapse. How do you know the same thing that happened to the third survey team won't happen to us? The truth is, I don't. But let me tell you something. You know how they built that concrete containment structure around the reactor? They weren't trying to seal the reactor. They were trying to seal this place to prevent whatever came into our reality from getting out. A few years ago, the thing we feared most happened. The containment began to crack. They were trying to escape. So they built a new containment structure recently. But for how long will this work? Sooner or later, something will fail and they will get out. This might be our only chance to end this permanently. How had I gotten into this situation? It was my fault. I was just some random person in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Professor Kovalenko was talking, as if the fate of our world depended on me. Maybe he was right. Maybe whatever series of coincidences had brought us here meant that he and I were the only people who could do what needed to be done. All right, let's do it, I said. We put on what appeared to be modified environmental suits, left everything except the device in the control room, and entered the machine chamber. We found ourselves in a dome-shaped room filled with incredibly complex machinery. In the center was a sphere of brilliant white light, and above it, a black shaft extended straight up, surrounded by twisted metal and debris. We tethered ourselves to a steel railing, and Professor Kovalenko walked forward into the sphere of light and disappeared. After some hesitation, I followed. I found myself in a place that defies description. There was no up or down. I could walk in any direction as if it were solid ground. The space appeared empty, yet I could see countless, impossibly large geometric shapes covered with billions of tiny points of light. "Where are you?" I called out. "Here," he replied, grabbing my arm seemingly from nowhere. I noticed hundreds or thousands of other white spheres in the distance around us. Are those, yes, portals from other parallel realities? We can't close them all, just ours. The others aren't our problem. They'll have to find their own way to handle this. We approached one of the distant geometric forms. Like everything in this place, it was difficult to describe. It was like a fractal, the same pattern repeating infinitely at every scale. "I think this is it," Professor Kovalenko said, beginning to work with the device. It beeped several times, then started producing a high-pitched hum. "Oh no, this isn't good," he continued. "What's happening? Listen, I need you to take the other end and go back through our portal. Once you're back, flip this switch and hold this button down until the device activates." I picked up my end of the device and watched as the connecting cable began to unreel between the two components. "What about the key to get out?" I asked. "There is no key, but you said that was never the plan." "I couldn't risk." He didn't finish the sentence. I saw something moving in my peripheral vision. "Don't look at it. Run." Now Professor Kovalenko shouted. I listened. I ran back toward our portal, following the cable with my eyes nearly closed. I passed through the sphere of light and found myself back in the machine chamber. I placed the device on the ground, flipped the switch, and the machine began producing a similar high-pitched noise. I pressed the button and held it down. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the device and the portal erupted in an intense flash of light that temporarily blinded me. When my vision cleared, everything was gone. The severed cable and tether line lay on the ground, where the portal used to be. Victor had regained consciousness while I was gone, and I explained what had happened. We didn't know what to do now. We considered trying to go back and cut through the chain on the outside door again. But after everything that had happened, we doubted we could make it there alive. But then Victor had an idea. It took us several hours to figure out how the control systems worked. Much of the equipment was damaged, and the reactor was obviously out of the question. But the generators above provided enough power for what they had called a simple translocation. All we needed to do was input target coordinates and activate the system. A familiar clicking sound and the smell of ozone filled the air. A powerful impact shook the entire room, leaving a large dent in the steel door that connected the control room to the rest of the facility. "Not again," I yelled. "What if we use the machine to teleport out of here?" Victor suggested. "I think I understand how it works. There are some preset coordinates written down here. We just need to adjust the elevation so we end up above ground." "Make it fast," I said as the door shook under another tremendous impact. He worked quickly with the controls, and they lit up with warning alarms sounding. We ran to the machine chamber and sealed the door behind us. Just as we heard the control room door give way, we positioned ourselves in the center of the chamber and waited. Sparks and smoke filled the room as the machine activated. Then I heard another impact, and the door to the chamber broke off its hinges and crashed to the floor. I looked toward the entrance, and then time seemed to freeze. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt at peace, as if I was just one step away from understanding everything about the universe. I wanted to stay in that moment forever. A brilliant flash suddenly blinded me. Then I felt myself hit something hard. I opened my eyes and breathed in fresh air. We were lying upside down in a crater-like depression in the forest floor, but we were outside. We were free. We found our car after a few minutes of searching. As we drove home, we saw several military helicopters flying in the opposite direction. Victor checked into a hospital with a fabricated story about an animal attack. He recovered fully, and we never spoke about what had happened again. It was over, and I thought our world was safe from whatever had been trapped on the other side of that portal. But when I finally returned home that day, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The old oak tree that Victor and I used to climb as children, the one where he'd fallen and broken his leg. The one that only we knew about, it wasn't there. In its place was a cherry tree. I remembered a line from the research log I'd found. January 17th, 1985. We've managed to transport an apple today. However, I couldn't help but notice that the pattern of red and green skin on top was slightly different. We were transferring them between multiple parallel realities. Are we going to close them all? No, just ours. The others aren't our problem. They'll have to find their own way to handle it. I think I'm not in the same reality I lived in before. I think when we teleported out, we ended up in a different one. I can't stop thinking that the portal in this reality might still be open. I don't think we're safe. My wife Alina and I have been together for 7 years and married for 14 months. Our entire relationship has been wonderfully ordinary, filled with quiet evenings and weekend trips to antique shops. Never once did I notice any warning signs or strange behaviors that would prepare me for what was to come. I cannot emphasize enough how completely out of character this whole situation is for her. Alina is gentle, thoughtful, and deeply creative. She used to be a freelance photographer before we moved to this old farmhouse on the outskirts of Millbrook. The work dried up after we relocated, and she's been struggling to find her artistic voice again. She's always been the practical one between us, the one who remembers to pay bills and water the plants. Playing pranks or trying to frighten someone simply isn't in her nature. She doesn't even like surprise parties, claiming they make her anxious. When we first started dating, I tried to get her to watch classic horror films with me. She agreed to sit through The Exorcist one October evening, but she spent most of the movie with her hands covering her eyes. She made it to the end, but barely. And afterwards she said she'd rather stick to documentaries and romantic comedies. That's just who Alina is, or was anyway. She finds comfort in predictability and gentle things. I should mention that she's never shown any signs of mental illness. Her family history is clean too, as far as I know. In 7 years together, I've never seen her have a panic attack, depression, or any kind of breakdown. If she was hiding something this significant, I think I would have noticed some kind of sign by now. 3 months ago, I was grading papers in my study when I decided to take a break and make some tea. It was around 8 in the evening, and the winter sun had long since disappeared behind the bare oak trees that line our property. As I walked down the narrow hallway toward the kitchen, something made me glance toward the living room. Alina was crouched behind our old leather armchair, and she had her camera raised to her eye. The lens was pointed directly at me. I could see her dark hair falling across her shoulder, and one brown eye visible above the camera body. The moment our eyes met, she quickly lowered the camera and stood up, smoothing down her sweater. "Oh, hi, honey," she said, as if nothing unusual had happened. "I was just, testing the light in here. The lamp creates interesting shadows. I found it odd, but not alarming." Alina had been trying to get back into photography lately, taking pictures of random things around the house, so her explanation seemed reasonable enough. I asked if she'd gotten any good shots, and she nodded enthusiastically, showing me the camera's display screen. There were indeed several photos of the lamp, and the way its light fell across the hardwood floor. "That's great, babe," I said, kissing her cheek. "I'm glad you're getting back into it." She smiled and went back to adjusting her camera settings. I made my tea and returned to grading papers, thinking nothing more of it. Looking back now, I realized that was the beginning of everything. The next incident happened 5 days later. I had gotten up around 2 in the morning to get a glass of water. Our old farmhouse creaks and settles constantly, especially during the cold winter months, so I'm used to hearing various sounds at night. But as I stood in the kitchen, drinking my water and looking out at the snow-covered fields, I heard the distinct sound of a camera shutter. Click, click, click. I turned around slowly, and there was Alina standing in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room. She had her camera raised, and she was taking pictures of me. In the darkness, I could barely make out her silhouette, but I could see the small red light on her camera blinking. "Alina," I said, setting down my glass. "What are you doing?" She lowered the camera immediately. "Sorry I couldn't sleep. You looked so peaceful standing there, and the moonlight was hitting you just right. I hope you don't mind." Her voice sounded normal, maybe a little embarrassed. I wasn't upset, just confused about why she felt the need to photograph me at 2 in the morning without asking first. "Next time, just ask," I said gently. "You startled me." "Of course," she said, coming over to give me a hug. "I'm sorry. I got carried away. You know how I get when I see a good shot." We went back to bed together, and she curled up next to me like she always did. Her breathing became slow and steady within minutes, and I assumed she had fallen asleep. But something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been watching me for a while before I heard the camera shutter. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing Alina with her camera more often. She would be taking pictures of seemingly random things around the house. The texture of the wallpaper, the way shadows fell across the stairs, the patterns that frost made on our windows. It seemed like a positive development, like she was finally finding her creative spark again. But then I began to realize that many of these photo sessions happened when I was nearby. I would be reading in the living room, and I'd catch a glimpse of her in the hallway, camera in hand. I'd be cooking dinner, and she'd appear in the doorway, quietly snapping pictures. At first, I thought she was just documenting our daily life together, which seemed sweet. One evening, I was taking a shower after a long day of teaching, and I heard that familiar clicking sound. I peeked around the shower curtain and saw Alina standing in the bathroom doorway, camera raised. "Alina, what the hell?" I said, more surprised than angry. She jumped, nearly dropping her camera. "Oh my God, Marcus, I'm so sorry. The steam was creating such interesting patterns on the mirror, and I thought you were taking pictures of me in the shower." Her cheeks turned red. No, I was focused on the mirror. You just happened to be in the frame. I'm really sorry, I should have asked first." I felt violated, but I also felt guilty for making her so embarrassed. Alina had never been inappropriate or invasive before. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Just ask next time, okay? I'd prefer some privacy when I'm showering." "Of course," she said quickly. "I'm really sorry, Marcus. I got carried away again, but the incidents continued. I would wake up in the middle of the night and catch her sitting in the chair by our bedroom window, camera in her lap, pointed toward the bed. When I'd ask what she was doing, she'd say she was photographing how the moonlight fell across the quilt or the interesting shadows on the wall. Then I started finding the pictures. I was looking for a phone charger in her desk drawer when I came across a stack of printed photographs. They were all of me. Me sleeping, me reading, me cooking, me grading papers. There were dozens of them, all taken without my knowledge. Some were clearly shot from hiding places behind furniture, around corners, through partially open doors. In many of the photos, I looked completely unaware, absorbed in whatever I was doing. But in others, especially the ones taken while I was sleeping, there was something unsettling about the angles and the way the shadows fell across my face. It was as if she had been studying me, documenting me like I was some kind of specimen. I confronted her that evening when she came home from the grocery store. "Alina, we need to talk," I said, holding up the stack of photographs. Her face went pale when she saw them. "Oh, those. Marcus, I can explain. You've been taking pictures of me without my permission. For weeks, apparently." She sat down heavily on the couch, running her hands through her hair. "I know how it looks, but it's not what you think. I've been struggling so much with my photography, and you're my favorite subject. You're so natural, so unguarded. When I try to pose you or ask you to smile for the camera, it doesn't capture the real you. So you decided to spy on me instead." "I wasn't spying," she said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "I was creating art. These photos, Marcus, they're some of the best work I've ever done. Look at them, really look at them." I glanced down at the photos again. I had to admit, they were beautifully composed. The lighting was perfect, the angles were interesting, and she had captured moments I didn't even remember, me laughing while reading a funny passage in a book, me concentrating while writing lesson plans, me looking peaceful in sleep. "They're good photos," I admitted. "But Alina, this isn't okay. You can't just photograph people without their consent, even if you're married to them." "You're right," she said, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry." I got so caught up in the creative process that I forgot about boundaries. I'll delete all of them if you want me to. I don't want you to delete them, I said, sitting down next to her. But I want you to ask from now on. And no more pictures while I'm sleeping. That feels too invasive. She nodded eagerly. Of course. I promise. For about 2 weeks, things seemed to return to normal. Alina still carried her camera around, but she would ask before taking pictures of me. She showed me her work, and I was impressed by her growing portfolio. She was definitely getting her creative confidence back. But then I started having the feeling that I was being watched again, even when I couldn't see Alina or her camera anywhere. It was a prickly sensation on the back of my neck, like invisible eyes following my every movement. I would turn around suddenly, expecting to catch her in the act, but she would be nowhere in sight. One night I woke up to use the bathroom and saw a small red light blinking in the hallway. When I got closer, I realized it was Alina's camera, sitting on a small tripod she had set up near our bedroom door. The lens was pointed directly at our bed. I picked up the camera and checked the settings. It was set to take a picture every 30 seconds, and according to the display, it had been running for over 3 hours. Alina was lying in bed, apparently asleep, but when I looked at her more closely, her eyes were slightly open, watching me. Alina, I said quietly. She immediately closed her eyes and didn't respond. Alina, I know you're awake. Still nothing. I took the camera and tripod into the living room and spent the rest of the night on the couch. In the morning, Alina acted as if nothing had happened. When I asked her about the camera, she claimed she had been sleepwalking and didn't remember setting it up. I've been having weird dreams lately, she said over coffee. Maybe I'm acting them out in my sleep. I wanted to believe her, but something in her eyes made me doubt her explanation. There was a sharpness there, a kind of intense focus that I'd never seen before. That's when I decided to call her mother. Victoria Hartley had been a psychiatrist before she retired, and while she and I had never been particularly close, I thought she might have some insight into Alina's behavior. Victoria was a stern woman with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes. She had always been polite to me, but distant, as if she was constantly analyzing everything I said and did. Marcus, she said when she answered the phone. This is unexpected. Hi, Victoria. I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to talk to you about Alina. She's been acting strangely lately, and I'm concerned about her mental health. There was a long pause. What kind of strange behavior? I told her about the photographs, the midnight camera sessions, and the feeling that I was constantly being watched. Victoria listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Has she mentioned anything about her dreams? Victoria finally asked. She said she's been having weird dreams and thinks she might be sleepwalking. Another pause. Marcus, I think you should know that Alina has a history of sleep disorders. When she was a teenager, she went through a period of very intense sleepwalking. She would get up at night and arrange objects around the house, sometimes for hours at a time. We had to put locks on her bedroom door to keep her from wandering outside. This was news to me. Alina had never mentioned having sleep problems. Why didn't she tell me about this? I asked. She was probably embarrassed. The sleepwalking stopped when she went to college, so she likely thought it was behind her. but stress can trigger a recurrence. Has she been under any unusual pressure lately? I thought about Alina's struggle to find work as a photographer, her frustration with her creative block, and the isolation of living in our rural farmhouse. She's been frustrated about her career, I said, and we moved out here 6 months ago. She doesn't know many people in town yet. That could certainly be enough to trigger an episode, Victoria said. My advice would be to be patient with her, and perhaps suggest she see a sleep specialist. In the meantime, you might want to secure any cameras or equipment that she could access during her sleepwalking episodes. I thanked Victoria for the information and hung up, feeling somewhat relieved. If Alina was sleepwalking, that would explain her strange behavior and her apparent lack of memory about setting up the camera. It also meant that she wasn't deliberately trying to spy on me or violate my privacy. But my relief was short-lived. That night, I decided to stay awake and watch Alina sleep. If she was sleepwalking, I wanted to see it for myself so I could better understand what she was going through. I pretended to fall asleep, then quietly opened my eyes to observe her. For the first hour, Alina seemed to be sleeping normally. Her breathing was deep and regular, and she didn't move much. But around 2 in the morning, she sat up in bed slowly, her eyes open but unfocused. She climbed out of bed and walked over to her dresser, where she picked up her camera. I watched as she moved through the room like a ghost, silently positioning herself in different locations and taking pictures of me lying in bed. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, not the clumsy fumbling I would have expected from someone who was sleepwalking. What disturbed me most was her face. Even in the dim light, I could see that her expression was intense and focused. Her eyes weren't the glazed, vacant eyes of a sleepwalker. They were alert and purposeful. She spent about 20 minutes photographing me from various angles, then returned to her side of the bed and lay down. Within moments, her breathing became deep and regular again, as if she had never been awake. I lay there for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I had witnessed. Alina hadn't been sleepwalking. She had been fully conscious and deliberate in her actions. She had lied to me about not remembering, and she had lied about sleepwalking. The next morning, I decided to confront her again, but this time I was prepared for her denials. Alina, we need to talk about what happened last night. She looked up from her coffee with a puzzled expression. What happened last night? You got up around 2 and took pictures of me while I was sleeping. You weren't sleepwalking, and you weren't in some kind of trance. You were fully awake and aware of what you were doing. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, and then something that looked almost like relief. Okay, she said quietly. You're right. I wasn't sleepwalking. Then why did you lie to me? She was quiet for a long time, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her eyes, something I couldn't quite identify. Because I knew you wouldn't understand, she said. You'd think I was crazy or obsessed or something. But Marcus, these photographs I've been taking of you, they're extraordinary. They're the best work I've ever done. When I look at you through the camera lens, I see things about you that I never noticed before. The way the light hits your skin, the expressions that cross your face when you think no one is watching. It's like I'm discovering who you really are. Alina, that's not normal. You're violating my privacy and lying to me about it." "I'm not trying to violate anything," she said, her voice becoming more animated. "I'm trying to capture something beautiful and true. You don't understand what it's like to have a creative vision and not be able to express it. For months, I felt like I was losing myself, like I'd forgotten how to see the world through an artist's eyes. But when I photograph you, everything comes alive again." I could see the passion in her face, the same intensity I had seen when she was taking pictures in the middle of the night. It was the look of someone completely consumed by an obsession. "Alina, I need you to stop. No more secret photographs. If you want to take pictures of me, ask first. And no more pictures while I'm sleeping, period." Her face fell, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. But then her expression hardened. "Fine," she said, "if that's what you want." But I could tell from the tone of her voice that she didn't mean it. Over the next few days, I didn't catch Alina taking any unauthorized pictures, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I would be in my study, grading papers, and I'd get the distinct sensation that someone was observing me. I'd look up expecting to see Alina in the doorway, but no one would be there. I started finding strange things around the house. My coffee mug moved from where I'd left it, my reading glasses in a different room. Small objects rearranged in ways that seemed deliberate. When I asked Alina about these things, she would claim she hadn't touched them. Then I discovered the hidden cameras. I was looking for a book in our living room when I noticed a small black object tucked behind one of Alina's potted plants. When I examined it more closely, I realized it was a tiny digital camera, the kind used for home security. I found 2 more cameras hidden around the house, one in the kitchen and one in the hallway outside my study. When I checked the memory cards, I found hundreds of photos and videos of me going about my daily routine. Eating breakfast, grading papers, reading on the couch, talking on the phone with my brother David. The cameras had been recording constantly for at least a week. I was furious and frightened. This wasn't artistic expression or creative passion. This was surveillance, pure and simple. I confronted Alina that evening when she returned from a trip to town. "We need to talk right now," I said, holding up one of the hidden cameras. Her face went pale, but she didn't deny anything this time. "How long have you been spying on me?" I demanded. "I wasn't spying," she said quietly. "I was observing. There's a difference, observing. Alina, you hid cameras around our house to record me without my knowledge. That's the definition of spying." She sat down on the couch and put her head in her hands. "You don't understand, Marcus. When I watch you through the camera, I see things that I miss when I'm just looking at you with my eyes. The way you tap your pen when you're thinking. The way you smile when you read something amusing. The way you move through our house like you belong here completely. It's beautiful, it's creepy," I said. "And it's a violation of my privacy and trust." "I know how it sounds," she said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "But I'm not trying to hurt you or control you. I'm trying to understand you. I'm trying to capture something real and true by spying on me. By seeing you," she said, her voice becoming more intense. "Really seeing you. Do you know how rare it is to truly see another person? Most of the time, we're all just performing for each other, putting on masks and playing roles. But when you don't know you're being watched, you're completely yourself. You're honest." I stared at her, realizing that I was talking to someone who had lost touch with reality. This wasn't about photography or art anymore. This was about obsession and control. "Alina, I want you to get help. I think you should see a therapist." Her expression changed, becoming hard and cold. "There's nothing wrong with me, Marcus. I'm not sick or crazy. I'm an artist and you're my muse. If you can't understand that, then maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do." "I'm starting to think I don't know you at all," I said. That night I slept in the guest bedroom and locked the door. I didn't trust Alina anymore, and I didn't feel safe sleeping in the same room with her. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of the doorknob turning. I had locked the door, but someone was trying to get in. The knob turned slowly, carefully, as if the person on the other side was trying not to make noise. "Alina," I called out. The sound stopped immediately. I waited for a response, but none came. I got out of bed and approached the door quietly. I could hear breathing on the other side, slow and controlled. "Alina, I know you're there," I said. Still no response. I waited by the door for several minutes, listening. Eventually, I heard soft footsteps moving away down the hallway. In the morning, Alina acted as if nothing had happened. She made breakfast and asked about my plans for the day, just like she always did. But there was something different about her demeanor. She seemed more alert, more focused, like she was paying extremely close attention to everything I said and did. I decided that I needed to get away from the house and from Alina for a while. I called my brother David and asked if I could stay with him and his wife Amy for a few days. "Of course," David said. "Everything okay? Alina and I are having some problems," I said. "I just need some space to think." David didn't ask for details, which I appreciated. He and Amy lived in town, about 30 minutes from our farmhouse. Their house was small and cozy, nothing like the sprawling old farmhouse that Alina and I shared. When I told Alina I was going to stay with David for a few days, she didn't argue or try to stop me. She just nodded and said she understood. "Maybe some time apart will be good for both of us," she said. But as I was packing my bag, I caught her watching me from the hallway, and there was something in her expression that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't sadness or regret. It was more like anticipation, as if she was looking forward to whatever was going to happen next. I spent 2 days at David and Amy's house, trying to figure out what to do about Alina. Amy, who worked as a nurse, thought Alina might be having some kind of mental health crisis, brought on by stress and isolation. David was more practical, suggesting that I talk to a lawyer about a separation. "Maybe she just needs professional help," Amy said over dinner. Moving to a new place, struggling with her career, being away from her friends and family, that's a lot of stress for anyone to handle. "But the cameras," I said. "The lying, that's not just stress. Mental illness can make people do things they wouldn't normally do," Amy said gently. "That doesn't mean she's a bad person or that she doesn't love you." I wanted to believe that Alina's behavior was just a symptom of something treatable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more deliberate and calculating about what she had been doing. On my 3rd day at David's house, Amy went to work early, and David left to run errands. I was alone in the house, drinking coffee and trying to grade papers, when I heard a soft tapping sound at the window. I looked over and saw Alina standing outside, her face pressed against the glass. She was holding her camera, and she was taking pictures of me through the window. I jumped up and ran to the window, but by the time I got there, she was gone. I looked around the yard, but I didn't see her anywhere. Her car wasn't in the driveway either. I called David immediately. Alina was just here, I said. She was taking pictures of me through your window. What? Are you sure? I'm positive. She was right there, and then she disappeared. I'm coming home, David said. When David arrived, we searched the entire yard and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of Alina. David suggested that I might have been imagining things, that the stress of the situation was making me paranoid. I didn't imagine it, I insisted. She was there, but I was starting to doubt myself. How had Alina found me at David's house? How had she gotten there without a car? And how had she disappeared so quickly? That evening, I decided to call Alina and confront her about what had happened. Alina, were you at David's house today? David's house, she said, sounding confused. No, I've been home all day. Why? Someone was taking pictures through the window. It looked like you. Marcus, that's impossible. I haven't left the house since you went to David's. I've been working on organizing my photo files. She sounded genuinely confused, but I didn't believe her anymore. I had seen her face pressed against the window, her camera in her hands. Alina, I think you need help. This has gone too far. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Marcus, are you feeling okay? You sound paranoid. I hung up, feeling more confused and frightened than ever. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump, and I kept getting up to check the locks on David's doors and windows. Around 2 a.m, I was lying on the couch when I heard that soft tapping sound again. I got up quietly and crept toward the living room window. Alina was there again, her face pressed against the glass, her camera raised. But this time, she wasn't taking pictures. She was just watching me, her eyes wide and unblinking. We stared at each other through the glass for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. Then she smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and raised her camera to take a picture. The flash went off, temporarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, she was gone. I ran outside in my pajamas, but the yard was empty. I looked everywhere behind trees, around the house, in the garage, but Alina was nowhere to be found. When David came downstairs to see what was going on, I was standing in the front yard in the cold, calling Alina's name. Marcus, what the hell are you doing? He asked. She was here again, I said. Alina was here, taking pictures. David looked around the empty yard. I don't see anyone. She was right there at the window. David put his arm around my shoulders and led me back inside. Come on, let's get you warmed up. As we walked back to the house, I looked over my shoulder one more time. In the snow beneath the living room window, I could see a single set of footprints leading away from the house toward the road. David, I said, pointing to the footprints. Look, he followed my gaze and saw the tracks in the snow. His expression changed from concern to alarm. Okay, he said. That's definitely someone's footprints. We followed the tracks to the edge of his property, where they disappeared at the road. There were no tire tracks or any other sign of how Alina might have arrived or left. This is getting really weird, David said. Maybe we should call the police. I wasn't sure what I would tell the police. That my wife was taking pictures of me without permission. That she was showing up at my brother's house in the middle of the night. None of it sounded like something the police would take seriously. Let me try talking to her one more time, I said. The next morning, I drove back to our farmhouse. I needed to see Alina face to face and try to understand what was happening to her and to us. The house was quiet when I arrived. Alina's car was in the driveway, but when I called her name, there was no response. I found her in her darkroom, which she had set up in our basement. She was developing photographs, working with an intense concentration that seemed almost like a trance. Alina, she looked up, and for a moment she seemed surprised to see me, as if she had forgotten I existed. Marcus, she said, you're back, we need to talk. She nodded and began cleaning up her developing equipment. Let me just finish this batch. While she worked, I looked around the darkroom. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, all of me. Some were the pictures I had found in her desk drawer, but many were new ones I had never seen before. There were photos of me sleeping, eating, reading, grading papers, talking on the phone. There were pictures of me at David's house, taken through the window. But what disturbed me most were the photos that seemed to have been taken from impossible angles, from inside walls, from above the ceiling, from places where no camera could physically be positioned. Alina, I said, my voice shaking, what are all these pictures? She looked up from her work and followed my gaze to the walls. My collection, she said simply. My life's work. How did you take some of these? This one looks like it was taken from inside the wall. She studied the photo I was pointing to. Oh, that one. I drilled a small hole in the wall and fed a fiber optic camera through it. You can buy them online. They're used for inspecting pipes and things like that. I felt sick. You've been watching me through the walls. Only sometimes, she said, as if that made it better. When I needed a particular angle or when you were being especially interesting. Alina, this is insane. You can't spy on people like this. She turned to face me fully, and I saw that same intense focus in her eyes that I had been seeing more and more lately. I'm not spying, she said. I'm documenting. Do you realize how precious these moments are? How rare it is to capture someone in their completely natural state. Most people never get to see themselves the way I see you. I don't want to be documented, I said. I want to have privacy in my own home. This is my home too, she said, her voice becoming harder. And you're my husband. I should be able to photograph you if I want to. Not without my permission. She laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Permission? Marcus, you're being ridiculous. These photographs are beautiful. They're art. They're love letters written in light and shadow. I realized that Alina was beyond reasoning with. She had created an elaborate justification for her behavior, and she genuinely believed that what she was doing was not only acceptable, but beautiful and meaningful. I'm leaving, I said. I can't live like this. Her expression changed immediately, becoming desperate and pleading. No, Marcus, please don't go. I need you here. You're my inspiration, my muse. Without you, I have nothing to photograph. That's exactly the problem, I said. I'm not your muse. I'm your husband, and I deserve to be treated with respect and given privacy. I turned to leave, but Alina grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said. "Let me show you something." She led me to a table in the corner of the darkroom where she had been working on enlarging some photographs. The images showed me sleeping, but they had been cropped and edited in ways that made them look almost ethereal. The lighting was perfect, the composition was artistic, and the expressions on my sleeping face were peaceful and beautiful. "Look at these," she said, her voice full of excitement. "Really look at them. This is how I see you, Marcus. This is how much I love you." I had to admit that the photographs were stunning. Alina had a true artistic eye, and she had captured something in these images that was genuinely beautiful. But that didn't change the fact that they had been taken without my consent, while I was unconscious and vulnerable. "They're beautiful photos," I said. "But Alina, the way you got them was wrong." Her face fell, and for a moment I thought she might finally understand what I was trying to tell her. But then her expression hardened again. "Fine," she said. "If you can't appreciate what I'm trying to create, then maybe you should leave." I packed my things that afternoon and moved back in with David and Amy temporarily. Alina didn't try to stop me or argue with me. She just watched me pack from the doorway of our bedroom, her camera hanging around her neck as always. As I was loading my suitcase into my car, she came outside. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You can leave, but you can't escape what we have together. I'll always be watching you, Marcus. I'll always be there to capture the real you." I drove away without responding, but her words sent a chill down my spine. For the next week, I stayed with David and Amy, trying to figure out what to do next. I talked to a lawyer about getting a restraining order, and I talked to a therapist about Alina's behavior. Everyone seemed to think that Alina was having some kind of mental health crisis and that she needed professional help. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more deliberate and sinister about what Alina was doing. This wasn't just obsession or mental illness. This felt like stalking. My suspicions were confirmed when I started receiving text messages from unknown numbers. The messages contained photos of me at David's house, sitting at the kitchen table, watching TV on the couch, sleeping in the guest bedroom. Someone was still watching me and photographing me, even though I was miles away from Alina. I showed the messages to David, and he immediately called the police. The officers who came to take our report seemed to take the situation seriously, especially when they saw the photographs. "We'll go talk to your wife," one of the officers said. "This definitely constitutes harassment." But when the police went to our farmhouse, Alina wasn't there. Her car was gone, and the house was empty. The officers said it looked like she had left in a hurry, taking only essential items and leaving most of her belongings behind. That night, I got another text message from an unknown number. This time it was just 3 words: "Found you again." Attached was a photograph taken through David's living room window. In the image, I was sitting on the couch, reading a book, completely unaware that I was being watched. The photo had been taken just an hour earlier. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of Alina anywhere around David's property. The officers searched the area thoroughly and found footprints in the snow leading away from the house, but the trail went cold at the road. "She's escalating," one of the officers told me. This kind of behavior usually gets worse before it gets better. You need to be very careful. They advised me to stay somewhere else, somewhere Alina wouldn't think to look for me. David suggested I check into a motel on the other side of town, at least until the police could locate Alina and talk to her. I drove to the Pinewood Motor Lodge, a small, run-down motel that catered mostly to truck drivers and traveling salesmen. I registered under a false name and paid cash, hoping that would make it harder for Alina to track me down. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the parking lot. It was sparse and depressing, with faded wallpaper and a musty smell that reminded me of old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals. But it felt safe, and for the first time in weeks, I thought I might be able to get a decent night's sleep. I was wrong. Around midnight, I was lying in bed, trying to read a book to calm my nerves, when I heard a soft tapping sound at the window. My blood turned to ice. I knew that sound. I got up slowly and approached the window, my heart pounding. The curtains were drawn, but there was a small gap between them. Through that gap, I could see an eye looking back at me. Alina's eye. She was standing on the fire escape outside my second-floor window, her camera pressed against the glass. When she realized I had seen her, she didn't run away like she had before. Instead, she smiled and raised her camera to take a picture. The flash went off, temporarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I could see her more clearly through the window. Her hair was tangled and dirty, as if she hadn't washed it in days. Her clothes were wrinkled and stained, but her eyes were as focused and intense as ever. She pressed her face against the glass and mouthed the words, "I love you." I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. I grabbed my phone and called 911. "There's someone on the fire escape outside my window," I told the dispatcher. "It's my wife, and she's been stalking me." "Are you in immediate danger?" the dispatcher asked. I looked back toward the window. Alina was still there, still taking pictures. "I don't know," I said. "She's not trying to get in, but she's taking pictures of me without my permission." "We'll send someone right away," the dispatcher said. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until the police arrived. But by the time they got to the motel, Alina was gone. The fire escape was empty, and there was no sign of her anywhere on the property. "How did she know you were here?" one of the officers asked. "I have no idea," I said. "I paid cash and used a fake name." The officer looked troubled. "She must be following you somehow. Do you have any tracking apps on your phone? Any shared accounts that she might have access to?" I checked my phone and found that Alina had access to my location through a family sharing plan we had set up months earlier. I had completely forgotten about it. I disabled the sharing immediately, but the damage was already done. Alina had been able to track my exact location in real time. "You need to assume that she knows where you are at all times," the officer said. "Change all your passwords, cancel any shared accounts, and consider getting a new phone. This woman is clearly unstable and potentially dangerous." I spent the rest of the night in the motel, but I didn't sleep. Every sound made me jump, and I kept checking the window to make sure Alina wasn't there. When morning came, I packed my things and checked out, but I didn't know where to go. I couldn't stay with David and Amy anymore, because Alina knew where they lived. I couldn't go back to our farmhouse, because that was probably where she expected me to go. I felt trapped and paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and wondering if Alina was watching me. I decided to drive to the next town over and check into a different motel, this time using even more precautions. I paid cash, used a different fake name, and left my phone in my car so it couldn't be tracked. I also bought a disposable camera at a convenience store, thinking that if Alina was going to document my life, maybe I should start documenting hers. The new motel was even more rundown than the first one, but it felt anonymous and safe. I was on the ground floor this time, with easy access to the parking lot in case I needed to leave quickly. For 2 days, nothing happened. I began to think that maybe Alina had given up, or maybe the police had found her and convinced her to stop. I started to relax, even venturing out to eat at a nearby diner and to buy some clothes at a thrift shop. But on the third night, she found me again. I was brushing my teeth before bed when I saw movement in the bathroom mirror. Alina was standing behind me, reflected in the glass. I spun around, but she wasn't there. I looked back at the mirror, and she was gone from the reflection too. I searched the entire motel room, checking behind the curtains, under the bed, in the closet. There was no sign of Alina anywhere. I was starting to think I had imagined the whole thing when I noticed that the disposable camera I had bought was missing from the dresser where I had left it. I found it on the bathroom counter next to the sink. Someone had used it to take pictures. When I looked at the display on the back of the camera, I could see thumbnails of the photos that had been taken. They were all pictures of me sleeping. Alina had been in my room while I was unconscious, standing right next to my bed, taking pictures of me. The thought made me feel sick and violated in a way I had never experienced before. I called the police again, but I knew they wouldn't find her. Alina was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will, always staying just one step ahead of anyone who tried to catch her. The next morning, I checked out of the motel and started driving aimlessly, not sure where to go or what to do. I felt like I was losing my mind. How was Alina able to track me down no matter where I went? How was she getting into locked rooms without leaving any trace? I pulled over at a gas station to fill up my tank and try to think clearly. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a car parked across the street. It looked like Alina's car, but I couldn't be sure from that distance. I squinted, trying to get a better look at the driver. The driver raised something to their face. A camera. The flash went off, and I knew for certain that it was Alina. I abandoned the gas pump and ran toward her car, but she drove away before I could reach her. I got back in my own car and tried to follow her, but she had disappeared into traffic. I sat in the parking lot of the gas station, shaking with fear and frustration. Alina wasn't just stalking me anymore. She was playing a game with me, letting me see her just long enough to know that she was always there, always watching. I realized that I couldn't run from her forever. No matter where I went, she would find me. I needed to confront her directly and try to end this nightmare once and for all. I drove back to our farmhouse, expecting to find Alina there. But when I arrived, the house was dark and empty. I used my key to let myself in, and immediately noticed that things had changed since I left. The living room had been rearranged. All the furniture was pushed against the walls, creating a large open space in the center of the room. In that space, Alina had set up what looked like a photography studio, complete with professional lighting equipment and backdrop screens. But instead of a normal photography setup, this looked more like a shrine. The walls were covered with hundreds of photographs of me, arranged in careful patterns and sequences. Some of the photos I recognized from Alina's earlier work, but many were new, taken during the weeks when she had been stalking me. In the center of the room, there was a single chair positioned under the lights. On the chair was a note with my name on it. I opened the note with trembling hands. It was written in Alina's careful handwriting. "Marcus, I've been waiting for you to come home. I have so much to show you, so many beautiful photographs that capture who you really are. Sit in the chair and wait for me. I'll be with you soon. We have so much work to do together. Love, Alina." I looked around the room, suddenly aware that Alina might be watching me at that very moment. I checked behind the backdrop screens and under the furniture, but I didn't find any hidden cameras. Still, I had the distinct feeling that I was being observed. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was trying to be quiet, but not entirely succeeding. "Alina," I called out. The footsteps stopped. "Alina, I know you're up there. We need to talk." Silence. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding. The hallway was dark, but I could see light coming from under the door of Alina's darkroom. I approached the door and knocked gently. "Alina, are you in there?" I heard movement inside the room, and then Alina's voice, muffled by the door. "Marcus, is that really you?" "Yes, it's me. Can we talk? I'm developing some very important photographs," she said. "Can you wait just a few more minutes?" "Elena, we can't keep doing this. You need to stop following me and taking pictures without my permission." "I'm almost finished," she said. "These are the most important photographs I've ever taken. They're going to change everything." I waited outside the darkroom door for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, Alina opened the door. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed and tangled. Her clothes were dirty and wrinkled, and she had dark circles under her eyes. But her expression was one of pure excitement. "Marcus, you have to see these," she said, pulling me into the darkroom. The room had been transformed since the last time I saw it. Every available wall space was covered with photographs, but these weren't the careful, artistic compositions I had seen before. These were surveillance photos, grainy, poorly lit images that looked like they had been taken from a distance or through windows. All of the photos were of me. Me at David's house, me at the motels, me at the gas station, me walking down streets in towns I had never even mentioned to Alina. There were hundreds of them, documenting my every movement over the past several weeks. "How did you take all of these?" I asked, horrified. "I've been following you," she said proudly. "At first, it was difficult because you were being so careful. But then I realized that I didn't need to be close to you to photograph you. I could use telephoto lenses, hidden cameras, even satellite images. The technology is amazing these days. Alina, this is stalking. This is harassment. You could go to jail for this." She looked at me with confusion, as if she genuinely didn't understand what I was talking about. "I'm not harassing you," she said. "I'm documenting you. I'm creating a complete visual record of your life." Future generations will be able to see exactly how you lived, how you moved through the world, how you interacted with your environment. I don't want to be documented, I said. I want to have privacy. Privacy is an illusion, she said. We're all being watched and recorded all the time anyway. Security cameras, traffic cameras, satellites, social media, credit card transactions. At least my documentation is artistic and meaningful. I realized that Alina had developed an elaborate delusional system to justify her behavior. In her mind, she wasn't stalking me or violating my privacy. She was creating art and preserving history. Alina, you need help, I said gently. This isn't normal behavior. I'm worried about you. Her expression changed, becoming hard and defensive. There's nothing wrong with me, she said. I'm not the one who's running away and hiding in motels. I'm not the one who's paranoid and afraid. Maybe you're the one who needs help. I could see that reasoning with Alina was hopeless. She was completely convinced that her behavior was justified and that I was the one with the problem. I'm leaving, I said. And if you follow me again, I'm calling the police. You can leave, she said, but you can't escape. I have cameras everywhere now, Marcus. I can see you no matter where you go. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean, everywhere? She smiled, and it was the most frightening expression I had ever seen on her face. I've been placing hidden cameras in every location you visit, she said. The motels, the restaurants, the gas stations. Tiny wireless cameras that transmit images directly to my computer. I can watch you in real time, no matter where you are. I stared at her in horror. That's impossible. You'd need access to those places to install cameras. It's easier than you think, she said. People don't pay attention to small objects. A camera the size of a button can be hidden almost anywhere. And once it's in place, it can broadcast for months on a single battery. I thought about all the places I had been over the past few weeks, all the times I had felt like I was being watched even when Alina was nowhere to be seen. She had been watching me through hidden cameras that she had somehow installed in advance. You're insane, I said. I'm thorough, she corrected, and I'm dedicated to my art. I turned to leave, but Alina grabbed my arm. Don't go, Marcus. I have something special to show you. She led me to a computer that was set up in the corner of the darkroom. The screen showed a live video feed of what looked like a motel room. This is the room you stayed in 2 nights ago, she said. I'm still recording there in case you decide to go back. She clicked on another window, showing a different video feed. This one showed the interior of David's house. And this is your brother's living room, she said. I've been watching them too, waiting to see if you would return. I felt sick. Alina hadn't just been stalking me. She had been invading the privacy of everyone I cared about. Alina, you have to stop this, I said. You're breaking the law. I'm creating history, she said. Someday, people will understand the importance of what I'm doing. I realized that Alina was beyond help, at least from me. She needed professional intervention, and she needed it immediately. I left the farmhouse and drove straight to the police station. I told them everything about the stalking, the hidden cameras, the surveillance of my brother's house. The officers took my statement seriously and assured me that they would obtain a warrant to search our farmhouse and arrest Alina. But when the police went to the farmhouse the next morning, Alina was gone. She had taken her computer, her cameras, and most of her photographic equipment. The house was empty, except for the hundreds of photographs of me that still covered the walls of her makeshift studio. The police found evidence of the hidden cameras Alina had described, along with detailed maps and schedules that showed she had been tracking my movements for months. They issued a warrant for her arrest on charges of stalking and harassment. But Alina had vanished completely. Her car was found abandoned at a bus station 3 towns away, but there was no record of her purchasing a ticket or boarding any bus. It was as if she had simply disappeared. For the next few weeks, I stayed with David and Amy while the police searched for Alina. I changed all my passwords, got a new phone, and tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. I went back to teaching, though I found it difficult to concentrate. I kept expecting to see Alina in the back of my classroom, or catch a glimpse of her watching me through a window. The police advised me to vary my routines and stay alert, but they admitted that, without any leads, it would be difficult to track Alina down. She could be anywhere, and she clearly had the skills and equipment to watch me from a distance without being detected. I started having nightmares about cameras hidden in walls, about Alina's face appearing in windows, about being watched constantly by unseen eyes. I began to understand what it felt like to live in a panopticon, never knowing when or if you were being observed, but always having to assume that you were. 3 months after Alina disappeared, I finally moved into my own apartment in town. It was a small, sterile place, but it felt safe. I had the locks changed, installed a security system, and even hired a private investigator to sweep the apartment for hidden cameras. For a while, I thought Alina might have finally given up or moved on to someone else. I started to relax, to feel like I could build a normal life again. But then the packages started arriving. The first one was delivered to my apartment while I was at work. When I came home, I found a manila envelope with no return address sitting outside my door. Inside was a single photograph of me walking to my car that morning. The photo was taken from across the street using a telephoto lens. There was no note, no message, just the photograph. The next week, another package arrived. This one contained photos of me grocery shopping, eating at a restaurant, and sitting in my apartment reading a book. The photos were taken from impossible vantage points, through windows, from rooftops, from places where no photographer could physically position themselves. I called the police, but there was nothing they could do. The packages had no fingerprints, no DNA evidence, no way to trace them back to Alina. The photos themselves weren't threatening, just disturbing. The packages continued to arrive every few weeks, always containing photographs of me going about my daily life. Alina was still out there, still watching, still documenting my every move. But now she was doing it from a distance, like some kind of malevolent ghost that haunted the periphery of my existence. I tried to ignore the packages, to not let them affect my daily routine. But it was impossible to feel normal when I knew that someone was constantly watching me, photographing me, studying my habits and movements. I started seeing a therapist who helped me understand that Alina's behavior was a form of psychological terrorism designed to make me feel powerless and afraid. She suggested that I might need to move to a different city, change my name, and start over completely if I ever wanted to feel safe again. But I refused to let Alina drive me out of my home and away from my job and my family. I had done nothing wrong, and I wasn't going to let her win. 6 months after the packages started arriving, I received one that was different from all the others. Instead of photographs, it contained a single piece of paper with an address written on it in Alina's handwriting. The address was for a storage unit facility on the outskirts of town. I stared at the paper, wondering if this was some kind of trap. Why would Alina give me an address? What did she want me to find there? Despite my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I drove to the storage facility and found the unit number that Alina had written down. The manager told me that the unit had been rented by a woman matching Alina's description, but she had paid for a full year in advance and hadn't been seen since. The manager agreed to let me look inside the unit, especially when I explained that the woman was my estranged wife and that the police were looking for her. When he opened the door to the storage unit, I gasped. The entire space was set up like a gallery, with hundreds of photographs mounted on the walls in careful arrangements. But these weren't the surveillance photos or candid shots I had been seeing for months. These were artistic portraits, beautifully composed and expertly lit. All of the photographs were of me, but they showed me in ways I had never seen myself before. In some, I looked contemplative and intelligent. In others, I appeared strong and confident. There were photos that captured moments of joy, sadness, concentration, and peace. Alina had been right about one thing. She was an incredibly talented photographer. The images were stunning, and they revealed aspects of my personality and character that I hadn't even been aware of. But what disturbed me most was the realization of just how long Alina had been watching me. Some of the photographs were clearly recent, but others looked like they had been taken years earlier, long before I had any idea that Alina was documenting my life. In the center of the storage unit, there was a single chair positioned under a spotlight, just like the setup I had found in our farmhouse. On the chair was an envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter from Alina. My dearest Marcus, if you are reading this, then you have found my life's work. These photographs represent 7 years of devotion, 7 years of seeing you as you truly are. I know that you think what I've done is wrong, but I want you to understand that everything I did was motivated by love. You are the most beautiful subject I have ever photographed. Through my lens, I have captured your essence, your soul, your authentic self. These images will outlast both of us. They are my gift to you and to the world. I know that I frightened you, and I'm sorry for that. But I had to make you understand how much you mean to me, how much inspiration you have given me. You made me a better artist, and I hope that someday you will be able to see these photographs and understand what we created together. I won't contact you anymore. I won't send any more packages or follow you or watch you from a distance. This is my goodbye. But know that somewhere in the world, I am still taking photographs, still seeing beauty in unexpected places, still carrying the artistic vision that you helped me discover. Thank you for being my muse. Thank you for helping me become who I was meant to be. With all my love, Alina. I read the letter several times, trying to process Alina's words. She seemed to genuinely believe that what she had done was an act of love and artistic expression, rather than stalking and harassment. I looked around at the photographs again, and I had to admit that they were extraordinary. Alina had captured something essential about me in these images, something that I recognized as true and authentic. But that didn't change the fact that she had violated my privacy and my trust in the most profound way possible. Love didn't justify what she had done to me. I left the storage unit and drove home, feeling confused and emotionally drained. Part of me was relieved that Alina had promised to leave me alone, but another part of me wondered if I could trust her word. That night, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained just 2 words: "Thank you." I never heard from Alina again after that. The packages stopped coming, and I gradually stopped feeling like I was being watched. The police eventually closed their investigation, unable to locate Alina or gather enough evidence to pursue the case further. I kept Alina's letter, though I'm not sure why. Sometimes I take it out and read it, trying to understand how someone could justify such invasive behavior in the name of art and love. I never went back to the storage unit to look at the photographs again. The manager eventually told me that Alina had arranged for the unit to be cleared out after a year, and all of the contents were donated to a local art school. I often wonder where Alina is now, and whether she found a new subject for her obsessive documentation. I hope she got the help she needed, but I suspect that her need to watch and photograph people was too deeply ingrained to ever be completely cured. I still have moments when I feel like I'm being watched, when I catch myself looking over my shoulder or checking windows for hidden cameras. The experience with Alina changed me in ways that I'm still discovering. But I've also learned something about the nature of art and obsession, about the thin line between love and possession, and about the importance of boundaries and consent in any relationship. I'm still teaching, still living in the same apartment, still trying to build a normal life. But I'm more careful now about who I trust and more aware of the ways that technology can be used to invade our privacy. Sometimes I think about the photographs in that storage unit, about the way Alina saw me through her camera lens. I wonder if there was some truth in her vision, if she really did capture something essential about who I am. But I also know that the most important thing about any photograph isn't what it shows, but whether the subject consented to being seen in that way. Alina never gave me that choice, and that's something I can never forgive, no matter how beautiful her photographs might have been. I was not blessed with intelligence when I first drew breath in this world. In truth, I was a dim-witted creature, a pitiful thing that could not even stand on its own 4 paws. I dragged my useless body across the frozen tundra, never wandering far from where my mother rested in the snow. At the time, I believed she cared little for me and my siblings, leaving us to fend for ourselves in the bitter cold. Now I understand she watched us with careful eyes. She was distant, silent, and simple-minded like me, but she knew how to sense the approach of wolves and other predators that stalked the endless white expanse. My brothers and sisters struggled alongside me in those early days, and it seems harsh looking back, but many of them did not survive their first winter. Life was merciless, crawling through the ice and snow, treating any scrap of frozen meat as a feast to be treasured. As I slowly grew, she eventually vanished into a blizzard, leaving me and my two remaining siblings alone when we were barely strong enough to hunt. They both perished within days of her disappearance, but somehow I managed to endure against impossible odds. I crawled through snowdrifts and struggled against my weakness, finding shelter in ice caves and scraps of food wherever I could. Slowly, I learned to use my limitations to my advantage, setting simple traps for Arctic hares and ptarmigan. But I remained fundamentally stupid, and no matter how clever I thought myself, failure came often and survival remained a daily battle. Living in the frozen wilderness, while mentally disabled and physically handicapped, was mostly a matter of pure luck, though at the time I believed myself quite skilled. I never stayed in one place for long, moving slowly, but carefully across the vast white landscape. My diet consisted of anything I could find, mostly small animals I could catch, but I could endure hunger for weeks at a time. Eventually, I discovered a small thermal spring with a shallow cave nearby. I made it my home for several seasons. It was not much, but it was hidden well behind hanging icicles and provided some warmth against the killing cold. I would drag myself to the spring and bask in the rising steam, sometimes sleeping under the pale northern sun during the brief summer months, eating whenever I could manage. These were my simple pleasures in those early years. Predators were always a threat. Wolves, polar bears, even great white owls that hunted in the twilight. Being crippled, running was never an option, so I learned to hide beneath snow drifts. I learned to read the subtle signs of the wilderness, when to remain silent, and when to make noise to scare away smaller threats. Against all odds, I somehow survived those years. Looking back, I mistook luck for wisdom, and that would have been my entire existence until I finally starved or my fortune ran out. But that is where my true story begins, where it should have ended. I was dragging myself across a windswept plateau, searching for anything to eat. Many days had passed since my last meal, and hunger gnawed at my belly like a living thing. All I knew was to pull myself through the snow, searching for carrion or small creatures I could ambush. I had just crawled around a large boulder when I saw them. The great white bear was crouched low, muscles coiled like steel springs. On any other day, I might have become its prey without ceremony, but its attention was focused elsewhere. I remained absolutely motionless, barely breathing, hoping to avoid its notice. The bear crouched even lower, clearly preparing to strike. Its black eyes focused with the intensity only a hunter possesses. I dared a quick glance at its target and saw the most unusual sight. A massive snowy owl, larger than any bird I had ever witnessed, nearly the size of the bear itself. Its feathers were pristine white with intricate patterns of silver and gold that seemed to shimmer in the Arctic light. Its crown was adorned with delicate plumage that caught the wind like silk. Of course, at the time, I did not realize how extraordinary this creature was. All I knew was that this bear was about to attempt taking down the giant bird. And it did. The moment the bear leaped, the owl erupted into the sky with a sound like thunder, soaring toward the distant mountains with the bear in hopeless pursuit. I remained still for a long time, watching until both vanished into the horizon. Eventually, I eased into the small clearing where the confrontation had occurred. There was little of interest at first, so I struggled up the small rise where the owl had been perched. When I reached the top, I discovered it was actually a nest, carefully woven from Arctic grasses and lined with the softest down. To my amazement, resting inside were 3 enormous eggs, each one larger than my head and colored like polished ice, with veins of blue and silver running through them. Of course, I devoured them immediately, right there in the snow. I dragged myself back to my usual shelter, sleeping with a full belly for the first time in weeks. That night, my dreams were filled with strange colors and sounds I had never experienced before. But that was when everything began to change. Over the following days, I started noticing things I had never been aware of before. Small details at first, observations about my surroundings that had escaped me previously. The world seemed more vivid, colors more distinct, even in the monochrome landscape of winter. I could focus on multiple things simultaneously, tracking sounds and scents with newfound clarity. As days turned to weeks, I realized I could devise plans more sophisticated than simply waiting for prey to wander within reach. I began constructing elaborate traps, using ice formations and wind patterns to catch my food. I chose denning locations where the sound of approaching footsteps on snow would alert me to danger well in advance. I was still dim-witted, but I was growing smarter with each passing day. I also began to grow larger, much larger. I had been an undernourished runt most of my life, but within several months I had become a formidable creature, well-nourished and nearly 8 feet long, all muscle and thick fur. I still had to crawl, but I could do so with speed and power I had never known. I felt hopeful and energetic, yet I had no idea what transformations still awaited me. As months turned to years, I was finally able to walk upright for the first time in my existence. Few predators could challenge me now as I stood nearly 15 feet tall, a titan of the frozen wastes with strength to match my size. I wandered freely through the tundra, eating what I wished when I wished. I built my first proper shelter from stones and ice, and I was the undisputed ruler of my domain. I climbed my first mountain, and I will never forget it. Hundreds of feet above the tree line, I finally reached a peak where I could see my entire world spread out below me. Endless white in every direction, broken only by dark patches of forest and the silver ribbons of frozen rivers. A landscape that had once threatened to destroy me was now mine to explore without fear. And explore I did. I began to travel great distances, discovering hot springs that created oases of green in the winter wasteland, vast ice caves that echoed with mysterious sounds, and deep valleys where strange plants grew that I had never seen before. I found creatures adapted to the cold in ways that amazed me: Arctic foxes and seals, caribou that migrated in thundering herds, and predatory birds that rode the wind currents like spirits. Over time, I developed a special fascination with watching the Arctic foxes. They were the only other animals that seemed to possess intelligence similar to my own, which is why when I found a small white fox pup that had been separated from its pack during a blizzard, I carefully collected it and took it with me. I nursed Snowflake back to health, fed him, earned his trust, and he became my constant companion. There were no names in those days, but none were needed. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine affection for another living creature. My first friend. I had to be extraordinarily careful, as my growth never seemed to cease. By my estimation, I may have reached nearly 40 feet in height by then, and this little fox was barely visible next to me. But the joy he brought me as we traveled together, as he hunted small prey and shared his catches with me, as he slept peacefully in the warmth of my fur, made me realize how profoundly lonely I had been during all those decades wandering the wilderness by myself. When he finally died peacefully of old age, I was devastated beyond measure. I knew it was approaching. I had watched him slowly weaken and fade, while I seemed to defy time itself and continue growing. Time moved differently for me now. Landscapes slowly shifted, rivers changed course, animals came and went in cycles I was beginning to understand. After his death, I retreated into a more solitary phase of my existence, mostly wandering the tundra and observing the subtle changes around me. I do not know how long I spent in this contemplative state before they discovered me. Other creatures, but these were unlike anything I had encountered. They were remarkably intelligent, more so than the foxes. They made complex sounds to each other in rapid, organized patterns. They used tools, perhaps even more sophisticated than the ones I had devised. And of course, they were terrified of me. I was a giant towering over them, nearly as tall as the ancient spruces that grew in the protected valleys. I mostly kept my distance, but would sometimes observe them from afar. They constructed ingenious shelters from animal skins and carved bone, far more sophisticated than my crude stone dwellings. They even appeared to control fire, lighting up the polar night in ways I had only seen during the brief summer months, or in the dancing lights that sometimes filled the sky. As time passed, more and more of them would venture near my territory. I slowly gained their trust, even though their wariness never completely disappeared. I learned over time what their sounds meant, and after considerable effort on both our parts, we were able to communicate quite effectively. They would often approach me with questions about the land, asking about good hunting grounds, safe routes through blizzard country, places suitable for establishing new camps. After all, I had traveled nearly everywhere across this frozen realm. One day, some of them began leaving intricate carvings in stone around where I rested. I asked one of them about these artifacts, a young hunter who had come seeking my help in moving a massive ice boulder that threatened to crush his family's shelter during the spring thaw. He told me the carvings were left as offerings, hoping I might bless them with good fortune. He explained how their lives were harsh and brief, and suggested that a spirit such as myself could surely make their existence easier. That was the first time I encountered the concept of being considered a divine being. I had already taken a liking to these small people, so I had been helping them with my knowledge whenever they asked. But he was right, I could do much more. I remember the mixture of awe and terror on many faces as I towered over their settlement. Perhaps they expected wrath for some perceived offense, but I quickly demonstrated that I was there to help by carefully removing the threatening ice formation and placing it safely away from their homes. Our relationship expanded rapidly over the following years. They devised ambitious projects that took advantage of my size and strength. In those years, we accomplished in days what would have taken them entire seasons, if such tasks were possible for them at all. We even replaced their temporary shelters with more permanent structures, stacking stones so tall they rose above the surrounding landscape, creating a crude but effective fortress against the brutal winter winds. I would later realize this was a primitive version of what they would call architecture. Things went well for considerable time, and I took an active role in the lives of my new friends. It reminded me of my old companion Snowflake, except now there were many, and I could communicate with them and share my thoughts and observations. It was an exhilarating period for me, and together we accomplished remarkable things. We diverted streams to bring water to areas where they could cultivate hardy plants during the brief growing season. We studied the northern lights together and speculated about the mysteries of the world beyond our frozen realm. I watched friends be born, grow old, and die, only for new friends to take their place. After many years, though, their numbers grew substantially. And eventually, there were so many that they began competing with each other over what had seemed to be the boundless resources of the tundra. Their language evolved, and I could no longer understand all of them, only those who remained near my territory. They began asking me for assistance or blessings in conflicts with other groups, raids against distant settlements. I always refused such requests. The breaking point came when the tribe I was closest to attempted to sacrifice a young girl in my name, hoping to gain my support in an upcoming territorial dispute. I had tried to be patient with them and understand their ways, but their pettiness had overwhelmed my tolerance. There were too many people, too many settlements, too many conflicts, too much suffering. I felt like I was crawling helplessly through the snow again, confused and uncertain, with little ability to improve anything. I realized the moment they placed the child on their crude altar that I had forgotten what it meant to be powerless. So I accepted their sacrifice. I took the girl and left that place, never to return. I traveled as far south as I could, eventually reaching a great cliff overlooking a frozen waterfall, far from the small people and their endless disputes. I built her a shelter from stones at the top of the cliff, right beside the waterfall, with a spectacular view of the ice formations below. I did not even think to ask her name, until she took the initiative to tell me much later. Names had little meaning in the wilderness, but I learned it was Nara, an ancient and beautiful name I will never forget. We were together for many years. She grew up under my protection, and once again more small people discovered us. Once again they would come seeking advice at first, and once again their requests would grow increasingly demanding. Distrustful of these people now, I would often withdraw or refuse to communicate with them. Often I could not understand their evolving language anymore. But Nara would take over and represent me when the burden became too overwhelming. She even adorned herself with white feathers and furs to gain trust and status among the visitors, so they would understand that I placed my confidence in her. After a time, it became expected that she was the one you would speak to when seeking my counsel, which suited me perfectly. She never once misrepresented my wishes. We were both children of misfortune, abandoned by fate, and then entrusted with something special we could use to help others. I knew she could be trusted completely. I slowly came to understand that she was exceptionally skilled at what she did. I watched her resolve disputes, forge alliances between rival groups, and eventually help end a war that had been devastating the region. I was a simple creature of the wilderness, but she was a diplomat, and she knew how to use my reputation and power to change these people, to help them become better. I loved her more than I had even loved Snowflake. She was kind and gentle, but also intelligent and uncompromising. She taught me concepts I had never encountered, things she learned from our visitors. We had no material needs, so knowledge was traded for knowledge. Gradually, I was introduced to what I would later recognize as mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and more. This gave me a new perspective on the world around me, one I had never properly considered despite being more ancient than many of the oldest trees. It constantly amazed me that these small people were so creative and intelligent, and it was Nera who inspired me to place my faith in them once again. I started taking a more active role in their affairs, but being mostly confined to one location. I focused on studying and philosophizing, trying to make myself useful to the small people in ways that I could. I absorbed knowledge eagerly and offered it back to anyone who sought it. I was too large to move freely through the landscape now without causing massive destruction, but the small people seemed content to come to me. Nera even gave me a proper name. While the small people had called me various things before, this was the first one I truly embraced. In those years, my heart grew nearly as rapidly as my body. When she died, I was once again heartbroken beyond measure. It was a tragic accident, nearly 180 feet tall now. I was so massive it was difficult to move through any landscape without destroying everything in my path. I tended to remain in one spot near the top of the waterfall, and spent most of my time sleeping or gazing out over the vast and beautiful wilderness, framed by distant mountains hundreds of miles away. I do not know why she had approached so close to me while I was sleeping that night, or what cruel twist of fate caused me to shift position. But when I awoke, I discovered I had accidentally crushed her beneath my enormous form. I could barely recognize what remained of her. I had seen the small people weep before, but that was the first time I myself had ever truly cried. I had not even realized I was capable of such emotion. I retreated deep into the wilderness after that, avoiding everything and everyone. They were all so fragile, and I was so dangerously large. I wanted nothing more than to hide in some remote cave and never emerge. But finding such a large cavern now seemed nearly impossible. As was often the case in my existence, I lost track of time, probably ages. But eventually, the small people found me again, as they always did. This time was different, though. They remembered my name. They brought me food and gifts. Once again, they asked for my knowledge and assistance to improve their lives. I enjoyed their company despite my distrust, apathy, and depression. When they asked me to come with them to their settlement, I spent considerable time deliberating before finally agreeing. What I discovered when I arrived was a landscape completely transformed. Massive destruction of the forest had been replaced by cultivated fields, and a great city constructed of fitted stone, much like the fortress I had helped build so long ago, but far more refined and enormous. The number of small people was beyond counting. The forest devastation was so extensive that I could not see trees on the far side of their city. I stood there towering over everything and felt horror wash through me from head to toe. I felt as though this destruction was somehow my responsibility. I should have known this would happen. I should never have helped the small people, for they were so intelligent that the wilderness itself had become their victim. Or perhaps I should have guided them better, taught them to be guardians of the forest rather than its destroyers. I immediately departed without a word, returning the way I had come. They followed me, calling my name desperately for some distance, before eventually giving up and returning to their devastated homeland. I went further south, much further south. I found myself thinking about that magnificent owl from so long ago. Was it the last of its kind? What destruction had I myself caused to it or its species when I consumed its eggs? I had not been intelligent enough to consider such questions when I acted, but now the thought haunted me constantly. How easy it is to destroy something beautiful through sheer ignorance. I finally found a new cave, my cave, large enough for me to fit comfortably, and I went to sleep. As always, I do not know for how long. Ages, most likely. Once again, I was awakened by the small people. They had not changed much by my perception, but their language was entirely new. It took considerable time to understand them again, but once I did, they told me of their empire, greater than any before, and cities of stone that fed and housed vast numbers of people. I could barely imagine how many of them could survive on the resources of the wilderness. But they told me they no longer needed the forest. They claimed to have tamed the wild lands entirely. I remember asking one of their supposed wise men what had happened to the people I had once known who lived in harmony with nature. He told me that their settlements had been abandoned long ago, and that they had retreated back into what remained of the forests. This gave me some hope, and I believed that in time, these people too would return to the old ways. I did not share my thoughts with him, though. I simply sent him away. More and more of them came to me, and before I knew it, they were erecting monuments all around my cave, destroying trees and killing animals in the process. I tried to drive them away, but they would always return eventually. I fled from them in frustration one night after years of interrupted rest. I went even further south, eventually finding another suitable home, one of many in my travels, but it was appropriate. Deep, dark, and hidden in the depths of a massive sinkhole. Nobody but I could descend this far into the earth. So here, I would finally be safe to rest undisturbed. No more small people. No more sadness. But this time it was different sounds that woke me. Grinding, whirring, ripping noises. Alien sounds, and the smell of smoke and burning. I do not know how much time had passed, but when I awoke deep in my hidden chamber, I knew something fundamental had changed. These were not sounds of the forest, or even sounds of the small people, as I had known them. I had to investigate. When I emerged from my cave and stood up to look over the trees, I saw smoke filling the air and enormous sections of forest completely burned to ash. I went to observe what was happening and watched the small people burning and cutting and tearing at the trees with strange tools I had never seen before. Loud, violent tools. Some of them spotted me, and it was not long before they were screaming and fleeing en masse. I could not understand. There were no crops here, no city. Why were they destroying the forest, burning it to nothing, not even using the wood from the trees as they once had? I walked through the devastation, and saw it stretch seemingly forever into the distance. I observed strange buildings, very different from the stone and thatch structures I was familiar with, and vast herds of unusual animals I had never encountered before. The forest had been converted to grassland by the small people. I stood watch over the area for several years, frightening away those who dared trespass. I wandered around and patrolled, destroying the infrastructure the small people used to attack the forests wherever I found it. I was careful never to harm any of them directly, and it was not difficult since they always fled in my presence. I became cold-hearted, though, and came to view the small people as a plague, a disease I had allowed to spread. Once again, I believed this was my fault, something I could have prevented. Time continued to pass. Many seasons, many years. I remember one day seeing a strange bird fly overhead. I now know it was an airplane, but at the time, it reminded me of that owl from when I was just a young giant. Majestic, beautiful. I tried to follow it, but it was far too fast, and I watched it disappear over the mountains, wondering what new lands it would discover there. Perhaps places without small people. No matter how hard I tried, though, I could not stop the destruction. Always small groups with simple tools and fire. I could not be everywhere at once. I felt despair. Time passed, but an old man found me one day and spoke to me in new and unfamiliar sounds. At first, I ignored him, but he was persistent, sleeping nearby every night and refusing to leave. He would approach every day and make the same sounds at me. He seemed harmless, and I felt lonely. So on impulse, I decided to let him stay for a while so that he might teach me the new language. We were eventually able to communicate clearly. He gave me his name, Tobias, and he too had been born in the forest. He told me many strange, wonderful, and terrible things. He told me about how the land was now used for raising cattle and farming. He told me how the silver bird was actually a machine created by the small people. He shared what he knew about science, history, and society, that there were entire nations of small people all over the world, that the small people had conquered everything. I came to feel he was like me, for he seemed saddened by it all. He said there was nobody left who understood the old ways, living in harmony with nature and taking only what was needed. He told me few people believed in such things anymore. He said I was just a frightening story told to scare children, or mythology taught in schools. Those who claimed to have seen me were met with disbelief. He said he had seen me as a child when I had driven off his parents at the edge of the forest, and that he had spent his entire life searching for me since then. The small people were always full of surprises. I welcomed him and his company. His knowledge warmed me as I continued to hide in the cave. He taught me to play chess. He told me wonderful stories, even brought me books. I had seen the scratches in stone from long ago and understood their meanings. But these were far more sophisticated. I learned to read, and I hungered for knowledge. He would venture out every few months and bring back more books, photographs, and at one point even a motion picture device for me, which I devoured eagerly. Years passed almost in an instant, and I barely ever left the cave. Eventually, he told me I would need to face my fears and do something about the encroaching small people who grew closer every day. But I knew he could see my wounded spirit, and he was kind and never pressed me. He understood that the small people had broken my heart. But what is broken can break again. And when he finally died a few years later, I found myself alone once more. Timeless, not like the trees, but like the very stone I dwelled within. I knew everything around me was temporary. It was all going to change and die anyway. So what did it matter what I did? And so I slept. I do not know how long it might have been. Ages. Eventually, I was awakened again by the small people's voices. In this case, you specifically, of course. I remember thinking at the time that I was half tempted to gather you all up and carry you to the edge of the forest, telling you never to return. But I observed you from a distance without intervening to see what you would do. My trust of the small people was low enough by now that I was prepared to stop you if you acted destructively. But to my surprise, you were nothing if not respectful of your surroundings. After several weeks of watching you, I saw you rescue injured animals, study the plants carefully, record information meticulously. I saw you exploring and appreciating the wonder of the forest, just like the small people of old, just like I had always done. I realized you were the scientists the old man had told me about, that you were here to learn, not destroy. That was when I decided to reveal myself. I knew you would be terrified, but I was used to that by now. I still remember the expressions on your faces when I first appeared. But when I managed to convince you, I meant no harm. Your natural scientific curiosity took over. I can only assume it was the same curiosity that drives me. I believe you are like the other small people I once knew. Kind, loving, and well-intentioned. That is why I trust you with my story. I hope you are able to share it and help me. For while I was once called a god, I am just as helpless as a newborn cub crawling, disabled in the snow on the forest floor. I turned off the recorder at that point and looked up at the towering creature, unfathomably large in the dim light of the cave. I told him that was everything I needed, and that I would return to see him again as soon as possible. He nodded in understanding, but watched with sorrow in his ancient eyes as we slowly made our way through the woods, leaving the cave we had been exploring for weeks behind. My colleagues and I had expected to discover an immense undiscovered cavern system with possibly uncatalogued species. We had not expected to discover this particular uncatalogued species. As I transcribed this log from his recording, we are setting up camp less than a day from the airstrip where we will be picked up. I do not know if anyone will believe me, or if they will think I digitally manipulated our photographs, but the rest of the team agrees we need to proceed carefully, lest we bring him unwanted attention. But I have to do something. I still remember the first words he spoke to me after all those days of terror and uncertainty, not knowing if we had discovered a monster, not knowing if we were going to survive. But the monster turned out to be anything but. I will never forget what he said the first time he spoke to us. I have been watching you. Do not fear. I have been here a very long time. The world is changing, and I am crawling in the mud again. I was once a small forest creature, but I was given the name Ursus long ago by someone I loved very much. Now, once again, I am as helpless as a small cub. I need you. Every day my home grows smaller, and the small people multiply. Every year I must hide deeper to avoid their metal birds and stinging smoke. I may look large to you, but I am just a simple creature crawling in the mud. Please help me save my home. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.